schedule that we're going to try and stick with our 45 minutes per presentation. So first up, we have co-hazard architects as selected by the Building and Grounds Committee through the pre-screening process. So we're going to turn it over to them here shortly. You all should have scoring sheets as we've discussed. When we're done with this presentation, if you would, make sure I get those back, and then we'll set up and regroup for the next meeting to start at 6 o'clock, or the next session to start at 6 o'clock. So any questions from anybody about order of operations or what to expect? All right, very good. So with that, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, and the floor is yours.
Very good. Great, I'm live, it's working. Well, good evening, I'm Keith Thompson. We are the Coke-Hazard and Wold team. Appreciate the invitation to come here tonight, and we're excited to show you why we're going to be the best team for the school district going forward. And I've got Vaughn here with Wold.
Hi, I'm Vaughn Dirks. I'm one of the partners with Wold. You asked us in our presentation to sort of focus on what was in the RFP, and so we built our agenda for what we want to talk to you tonight around 3 topics. And they're really topics that we think any district that's looking at a design team should be considering. The first one is, who are we, or more importantly, from your perspective, do we really want to work with these people? So we're going to tell you a little bit about who we are. The second one is, what's our approach? How do we actually go about getting this done? And does that sound like it's appropriate for us? Is that the experience that we want to have? And then the last one is our experience. Are they showing us things that look like, yep, we like what they're doing, we like what they're saying, that makes sense to us. And so we're going to try and just go through this. If you have questions, hands up, we'll stop, answer questions as we go. If not, we'll leave some time at the end for question and answer. This is your time, and we're excited for that. Before we get going, though, I have an exercise for you. And I couldn't have planned this better watching you eat your dinners here. I want you to think about one of the best meals you've ever had. Okay, you got that in your head? Now, I'm going to ask, was it because the food was perfect and that's the only thing that made it? Probably not. There's probably other things at play. It was probably the location, right? What was the atmosphere like? What was the experience? Was my waiter fantastic, or was it a meal that I had at home with my family? What went into preparing that? What kind of ingredients did it have in there? The point is, it's more than just the food. It's a whole number of things, and architecture is a lot like that. You want the food to be good, but you still want it to be a fantastic experience, and that's really what we found is that any of the firms you're talking to can design schools. It's not hard to design a school. It really is more than that. It's about the experience and what you go through to get there and how well you're prepared for the future and how well you can adapt. And more importantly, it's not about us, it's about you. It has to fit your community and your experience. And so that's really what we're focused on as a group and what we hope to convey to you tonight. I'll let the rest of the team kind of go through introductions and give you a little bit more information about us.
Again, I'm Keith Thompson, principal with Coke-Hazard. I've been with this firm about 15 years, and I actually started my career for 4 years at Wold Architects, just outside Chicago. So very, very excited to be working with my old coworkers again. I've been looking for the right opportunity for a couple years now, and just the conditions and timing of this worked out perfect. And again, very glad you invited our team to present together. And since I started at Wold, I, right out of school, started working on school design and learning about it. So that's kind of always been my favorite project type. And I've always appreciated ribbon cutting and seeing how the community comes out to appreciate their new facility and really demonstrate what a school means in the community. And that's really gratifying and why we keep doing it.
My name is Vaughn Dirks. As I mentioned, I'm one of the partners at Wold Architects. All I do is educational planning. I've dedicated my career to education, probably because my dad was a teacher. I have a lot of teachers in my family. I actually had my dad for math in middle school. And I love education, but I don't have the patience for it. Education takes a completely different temperament. It takes a completely different personality. But what I can do is contribute through facilitating conversation, which working with communities, and really working to make the best educational environment possible. And that's what I've dedicated my career to, and I'm happy to bring that to this conversation.
And I'm Valerie Peterson. I'm an educational planner as well as a project architect for Wold. In my 16 years, I've been really exclusively focused in pre-K-12, which has allowed me to do a lot of things from planning to renovations to brand new buildings. And I get really excited because even though sometimes the challenges are the same for the school district, every solution has been unique and different, and it looks different and it functions different, and that's how it should be, because it should function correctly for the school district.
I'm taking duet. engineer for, turn me down, Associated Consulting. I'm also a partner. Associated is a family business, started in 1988 with my two brothers. I came on board in 2005. I bought into the company in 2012. Now we actually have two of the original owner's sons working for us. So very family oriented, and we've done tons of schools.
We also have Brooke Wegner. She's going to stay in the audience tonight. She's the strategy officer and general all-around get-her-done person at Coke Hazard. And as we go through the process, she is the one that kind of stays in the background, makes sure everything's set up and everything's working. And if you don't see her, that's usually a good thing. Everything's going smooth. So, a little bit about Coke Hazard, founded in 1961. So we're celebrating our 60th year starting next month. Good milestone for us. We have over 350 K-12 projects, mostly in South Dakota, a little bit in Iowa and Minnesota as well. We really pride ourselves on hands-on principal involvement, meaning I'm your point of contact from day one all the way through construction and warranty review. Of course, we'll introduce additional support staff all throughout the way. And we also have a really great established consultant team that's been working together consistently on school projects for over 20 years, and a big part of that, again, is Damon and Ace.
I just had my secretary look up from 2014 to present. We've done 264 school projects, whether they're new additions or renovations. So we're very familiar with Keith and Coke Hazard.
In our firm, Wold Architects and Engineers, we focus primarily on public spaces. Education's a huge part of it. We probably do anywhere from 500 to 1,000 educational projects a year, all over the upper Midwest. That's where our focus is. But we also do a lot of government work where people engage with it, healthcare and senior living. That's sort of the project type that we focus on, which really has led to a philosophy in our firm and our mission statement. We really want to make a difference in the communities we serve. That's why people come to work with us. That's really what keeps people going. And honestly, it's what makes us approach projects differently. We ask different questions. We go through the process a little bit differently because we're trying to get at how can we build the ownership from your community around what it is that we're doing, what you need, what you want to accomplish, and then we're working for how to get you there. It's not important what we want, it's important what you want, and that's what our entire portfolio is built around.
So along with that comfort level of actually working with Vaughn and Valerie back in my Chicago days, that alignment of our firm values was very important. Made a lot of sense to team up. Coke Hazard is a community-oriented firm. When I moved back home to Sioux Falls, it's the only place I wanted to be. And have continued that in the communities we work in. We really try to get involved in the broader community, to volunteer and to give back. And the school project type is just a great way to do that.
So it's a little bit about who we are. We'll circle back to that at the end, but now we want to focus most of the middle on our approach. And again, trying to make it really simple. It's no more complicated than helping you understand what it is that you want to do, helping you plan for how to go about doing it, and then once you actually are ready to implement projects, making sure that you can execute those projects successfully. And so we'll start with the approach, and there's a graphic here that talks about these are the things that every district deals with. It's sort of an adapted Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you will, starting with physical conditions and working your way up to the pyramid to enrollment and capacity, getting to safety and security, educational issues, and you really can't get to the top unless you're addressing the bottom of that period. You can study it in a lot of different ways. You can go through and look at that objective data as you go through, but really what makes it unique to your community is when you get over into that right column of more of the subjective criteria and the subjective information.
And with the subjective data collection, that's where fun gets to really start. It's a lot of conversations. It's conversations with administrators, learning specifically about their buildings. We see that you guys have some great mission statement and about 7 belief statements. So it's also aligning your facilities and your curriculum needs to your overall goals. And how can we do that? And doing it in such a way that's clearly communicated and transparent so that the community can also understand your overall goals.
So to start the process, we have to look at those first level things, the physical conditions and some of those basic educational issues.
Yep, so we would get started with this potentially later this month, probably take 2 to 4 weeks, and that's just touring the facilities space by space with your staff, reevaluating the current conditions. We don't need to completely rewrite everything. You've done recent studies and a recent strategic plan that we can build on and update as a great starting point as well. But really, we also want to get down and talk to the more tenured staff and understand where the school started, what was added, what's changed over the years, why that was, and then what worked and what maybe didn't. And so we're going space by space again to evaluate what the needs are now, what sort of the baseline is to bring your facilities up to where they need to be to support your current curriculum, and then to look at what barriers might be in place to support your future goals, future curriculum. Side by side, Damon and his team are walking through the schools to evaluate systems.
We would take a look at all your mechanical, electrical systems, and determine what can be reused or what needs to be new, what opportunities you have to make your systems better. Filtration, those things are hot topics now with the COVID. And then look at physical constraints that your buildings have if we do design new systems.
And as we go through this, then we can assign costs to the various updates needed or the range of options, and then really look at what that reinvestment is, both for current needs and future needs, and help to evaluate as we move forward what makes the most sense for the district in terms of renovation, addition, new construction. Because if nothing else happens, we know you have to maintain your facilities. You got to keep kids in school. At our walkthrough, we did appreciate how well your staff takes care of the facilities. Just sometimes there are limitations built into the structure that are just too difficult to overcome. And we want to explore all of those options with you, so we're making the best choices going forward.
On top of the physical conditions and making sure the buildings are going to be upheld and really work well, we also then are starting to simultaneously work on the educational issues and going through. And there's some stuff that we can just go down the list and look at what's your capacity, what's your enrollment, how are things working. But really we have to get at those more subjective things to understand your history, your culture, and where you want to go. You've already addressed and dealt with a number of different things. It's about starting to prioritize where you want to go next.
And a lot of this is, again, through facilitating conversation. We may learn from a principal or somebody. We know you guys have an early childhood focus, and we may identify, hey, you know what, this room would be really great for child age care. It's adjacent to the adult room. It has an outdoor door to the playground. However, it doesn't have a sink. We can't wash our hands after toileting or changing diapers. You know, it's really identifying some of those barriers so that, again, we can fully understand that and report it on later. It's really through engaging in conversations that this can happen.
And our goal is to have this information all collected and finished before we ever meet with the community committee, before we ever start getting into the discussion of what do you want to do, because you have to have that data as the foundation for where you go forward. And that's really where we're going to start talking more about our process and working with the community. But before we do that, again, another exercise here. So when you're thinking about a design team and you're interviewing 3 of them tonight, there's 3 ways you can typically go with that. One is a pair of hands. You do what you're told as a designer. The other one is we're looking at you as experts. We don't know what we're doing. You tell us what we're supposed to do. And the third one is collaborative. So who wants us to be a pair of hands? Nobody? Nobody wants to just tell us what to do? How about experts? Who expects us to come to the table and be experts? It's pretty common. How about collaborators? That's usually where a lot of people land, but the truth is we kind of have to do all 3. There's times where you're going to say, we really need to make sure the community understands this, and we have to carry that message. We have to make sure that they understand what you're dealing with in the schools. There's times where we're going to get pushed back and say, we don't know what's going on here. You have to tell us. You have to bring that expertise to the table. But if we're doing both of those things effectively and really having conversations, that's where we get to collaboration. That's where we get to people understanding the why behind it and understanding what happens next. Because if we just start with solutions, people are going to say, well, how did you get there? We need to make sure people understand the why before you ever get into the solution process. And that's really what the collaborative process that we're going to work on with the community and eventually with the design teams that will be executing buildings looks like in terms of how we go forward. Here's an outline for it. It's a loose structure, and what we've been talking about so far is very far up at the top there, that collecting data. We're building all that so that we can get to the point where we establish a community-based facilities planning committee so that they can start to help us prioritize what's important.
And that community group is made up of various stakeholders throughout your community. This really needs to be a sounding board and represent accurately your community. So it can be staff members, administration throughout the district. Again, those community members, other stakeholders, parents, sometimes students. This group can range from 20 to 40 people. Sometimes if there's more than one project, maybe there's a couple of groups, because they can be focused. And otherwise, we know that the facilities planning can be very intimidating to a school district, and that's fine. We're here to guide you along those steps along the way.
So what that looks like is a facilities planning group comes together, and this is really a series of meetings that we do every couple of weeks. Every 2 weeks is a good pace for this. It's usually 5 to 6 meetings long, and we'll go longer if it takes longer. If it goes really fast and they're short, we can make it shorter too, but it's usually about 5 to 6 meetings. And it starts with that meeting 1 at step number 3, data review. That's where we're giving them, here's the status of the district. We show them the physical conditions. We go through, this is what we talked about with the administration and the principals. This is everything that we're dealing with so that they can start to see, okay, this is where we are today, so we can then focus the rest of the meetings over where do we want to go for the future. And that's really talking about what's happening in education right now, what other districts are doing, and having those types of conversations so that we can have them say, we've dealt with this and this, but we know that we need to focus here and here, and that's what we need for the future. So they're building the why for the community to go forward. And really, we have to have them focused on criteria as opposed to solutions when we move forward.
And criteria is really developing a common language. It's helping to set priorities and goals, and again, alignment with the district. This common language can help identify consensus, not only amongst the facility committee, but also throughout your district staff and as well as the community. Next, we start talking about agreeing on the need. You know, the criteria helps define the need, and the need is really a paramount step. We need to all agree on the need. It's easy to get into solution seeking and trying to find solutions, but that doesn't really work. That's not successful, especially if you don't understand the need that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, if someone comes and says, we need 3 more gym stations at the middle school, the first question out of most people's mouth is going to be, why? If you can back it up and understand that, it helps with the argument. And I'm not suggesting you need 3 stations at the middle school. But really, this is about educational dialogue. And so we're going to shift a little bit here and give you an example of here's the things that we're talking with other communities about. It may be what's important to you, and oftentimes going through this process, it brings up other issues and helps us and your community understand where the needs are in the process. It's how we engage students. It's how we engage learners in 21st century.
And it's also understanding that learning doesn't have to happen within the 4 walls of the classroom. Learning can happen anywhere, and students are happy to sit down anywhere and learn. It's providing spaces for that individual learner that wants to learn more independently, as well as allowing multiple group sizes or even multiple class sizes to come together to really promote that individualized learning experience.
And as we think about those types of spaces, and we're looking across all 4 of your elementaries, do each of your students, no matter which building they go to, have equity in that discussion? Are all the buildings approaching it in a similar manner? So no matter which building we go to school in, we get a similar educational experience for the community. Another space that we're spending a lot of time talking about is the media centers. And if you think about it, that's probably the area that education has changed, or spaces that have changed the most in the last 10 to 20 years. It's become more about data creation than data retrieval. It's not about kids just going there for books anymore, and they're almost using it as a feedback loop, and it's happening at every age. I go there to find out something I'm interested in, then I go out and I explore it in a specialized area, and I come back, and most importantly, I present it to other people. I'm communicating my ideas so I can start that over. So the spaces have to adjust to accommodate that need.
It's often the hub of the building, right? It's where people go to collaborate. They go there to work in large groups. They go there for some quiet time. It's a space where large staff group meetings can happen. It's a space beyond the school hours, right? This is often a space where PTOs can go, club organizations, and it's really, again, providing some amenities that you may not be able to have throughout the building, but in a centralized resource. The next thing is also about maker spaces, right? So I'm a parent. I have she's going to be 4 this month, and a first grader who's 7. And I know more than anything that those little kids, they love to take apart, they love to touch, they love to explore, and we really harness that as parents and even through the early childhood programming. We provide things like sensory tables and Play-Doh and different shapes and magnetiles and all that fun stuff for them to build and create on. And we should still promote that once they get into the school system. And how can we give them those amenities and those features?
And if they're getting excited about it when they're younger, that's going to carry on to a passion and interest for exploring things to a greater detail the older they get. And so we're having lots of conversation about career and technical education, how those spaces are evolving, and what can I do still while I'm in high school and explore a path. It may be as structured as an academy model where you're going all the way through. It may simply be, I'm interested in that and I want to explore that idea a little bit more. But we're seeing a return to those specialized spaces, more investment in that, and really more partnerships with businesses to help better prepare students for the next step of their life as they go forward. Whoops, skipped a slide there. Oftentimes those spaces need to transition as well, and a big part of what we help groups with is envisioning we can do that with your existing buildings. You don't have to always be building new. As a matter of fact, most of the projects we do are transitions and renovations of existing spaces. So helping understand how can we make that reinvestment in an area to accommodate more of a contemporary need in buildings that are still meeting the physical issues that we address.
And even more equally of an item to consider, it's not tearing down walls, it's your furniture. It's buying furniture that can adjust and the tops can flip and it has casters so that you can very quickly redo a function of a space. You can turn it from a lecture to a small group collaboration area, and it's really strategically buying a kit of parts of furniture that can allow transformation.
And oftentimes you don't even have to change the architecture to do that. A big part of conversations we're having is safety and security for obvious reasons. A lot of this is understanding what kind of culture do you want to have for your community? What's important to you so that we can make sure that we're implementing those pieces in the designs and in what we're doing going forward. And this is where our background with, as I said, we work on government facilities. We do lots of detention, emergency operations facilities, things that have to have a much higher level of security, but what that's taught us is how to do it really well and integrate it into what we're doing.
And it's really balancing the needs of welcoming a visitor, making them feel invited, but also balancing it with the safety and the security and making sure the students are comfortable. It goes sometimes beyond the outside walls of a building. It's also examining your site. Do pedestrians have a safe way from the road or traveling across the parking lot to get to your front door? Another consideration is the pandemic learnings, right? So we also have a healthcare senior living group, so we've been kind of exposed from all the pandemic side, from kind of all angles of our firm. And oftentimes it goes beyond the HVAC solution, which our team has been experienced in with the filtration solutions. But it's understanding how do you care for a child that just has a boo-boo on their knee and they need an ice pack versus somebody that's coming in with an upset tummy. How do you separate those? If anything, what we have learned the most out of the pandemic is that education can be delivered differently, and it should, and we want to support that.
We know that early childhood is a big part of the focus, and so we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the discussions we're having around that topic. Starting with the idea that if you think about education, there's been a huge push down in what we used to do and where we do it now. What we used to do at second grade and first grade, you're doing at kindergarten and early childhood. There's a whole approach to early childhood education that integrates it within the elementary schools. If you look at some of the stuff that the president's talking about now, a huge investment coming into early childhood. So it's understanding functionally, what do you want to achieve with your early childhood program and how can that best be met throughout the facilities? There's some basic considerations. Most of them revolve around parents. What's the drop-off sequence look like? How do I bring a toddler into the building with my other child? What type of adult education is going to happen in that space alongside the early childhood education? So we have to make sure that we're understanding those pieces, but most importantly, how the youngest kids in the building, the actual early childhood students are engaging the spaces.
Yeah, these are our tiniest learners, right? And this is our opportunity to introduce them to a school community and make them feel welcomed. And we want them to love to learn, right? There's a lot of things to consider about these learners, right? I mean, You can't stop it. They're going to go outside, play, get dirty. What's the first thing they're going to do? They're going to come in the building and rub their hand against the wall, right? You can't stop that. But it's also considering, what is that material? Is it easily washable? Is it easily cleanable? What is the scale and the texture that they can touch? Kids are going to touch it. Let them experience it. Let them actually enjoy the facility. Being able to find moments of invigoration and moments of calmness. And really, all of this resonates really closely right now because my children are going through it. So I've had lots of experience looking at these facilities, but now I'm looking through it through the lens of my children and as a mother. And it's really making sure that you're reducing parent anxieties when they send their first or their second, but their youngest person into the school system. And those are my children there on the bottom left.
She's a mom. She's thinking about this all the time, sending that 4-year-old out. So really, that's the 10-minute version of what we're talking about, but it's a much larger conversation. We didn't even get into community use and activities and athletics and all the other things that happen, but that's where the committee is going to go with us. We will facilitate that conversation with them, so in meetings 2, 3, 4, we're talking about what the needs are, reaching some agreement, so that as we evolve, the options come out of that naturally. Our goal is to not have people voting on options, it's to have the options be very clear and say, based on everything we've heard so far, and as you've explained it, it sounds like these are the needs. We can go back and change the criteria if the options want to be something different, as long as the group says, you know what, we made a mistake with that criteria. I think this is where we want to be. But our goal is that they're building this whole platform as we go forward, so that ultimately when we get through the options, we've evaluated all the cost estimates, we've looked at it and made sure it can happen, they're making the recommendation to you and to the community. It's peers talking to peers, because nobody cares about what your architect has to say. We'll facilitate the conversation, we'll give them all the resources and make sure it's solid, but in the end, it's their recommendation to you.
And again, this is your buildings, this is your district, and these are your goals, and we want to help you be successful.
And that leads into however you decide to implement it. Hopefully this plan is built solid enough that people understand the why behind it, they understand how you got to the options, and they're on board with implementing the project, which is really the last part of this. You now have a project to do. How do you go about implementing that as you move forward? And before we do that, one last exercise for you. So this is the last time I'm going to ask you to engage. In terms of construction, has anybody ever done an addition renovation on your house, renovated a bathroom, a kitchen? Yes? What was the best part about it? Anybody? It's done, right? What's the worst part about it? Everything else, the mess, while it's being built, the anxiety. Really, we understand that. It is an anxiety issue, and part of it for us means the more we can reduce that anxiety through the whole process, engage people in a way that they understand what's going to happen, they understand that we've been listening to them, they see that it's representing the project, and we've communicated through construction. You can minimize those anxieties as you go through so that the entire process is a good process. We want people to say when it's done, that was fantastic, not, we love the building, but man, that was a problem going through. And so everything we do is built around that idea.
And when this diagram may look similar to our planning process, because it often is. We start to develop a project-specific core planning group. Again, similar stakeholders, the building administrators, some select staff, board members if desired, and again, the community, stakeholders, parents, et cetera. And really, the point of this is that it shouldn't be an echo chamber, and a good facilitator will make sure that all the voices are heard. And then we start with schematic design, right? So schematic design, we start identifying with the core planning group adjacencies, synergies, what should be next to what is the appropriate program, how many, the size. It starts to set up some of the goalposts. It can look sloppy like sketches, but by the end of schematic design, it'll actually start to look like a real building plan.
So as we're getting to the halfway point of schematic design and on the way through to the milestone at the end of concept design, we're really narrowing down and focusing options again. We'll have a building program, understand what the spaces are, a rough footprint, and then we can assign costs to that, look at the big picture items along with Damon and his team for what's going to go on mechanically, electrically, and structurally. And then check back to our original stopping point of what are the needs, are we still addressing those needs with the scope, the budget, and the schedule that we have.
A lot of anxiety can come from, what about my space, right? You figured out the building and the layout, but what about my space? And what we do is a user input process where we meet with the owner of every room, right? We want to hear from the teachers. They're the real experts of their space. We want to hear about the type of equipment they use so that we can make sure we have the right outlet or the right data in the right spot for them. How much storage do they need? Do you need a marker board or a tack board? Should it be magnetable? It's all these questions that we review so that in the end, we do not want them to be surprised when they walk into their finished space. It should be walked in. This looks a lot like that simple diagram that I worked out with Val, months earlier. That is our goal of this.
So our entire team, again, is sitting at all of these meetings together. We're taking down all of this input, recording it, sending it back to everyone for clarification, any corrections. And Damon and his team are in that same group to get input on the controls and the other systems also.
Right. As we go into this phase, we work with the owner, work with utilities, and we decide what type of systems that we can implement into the buildings, if it's a retrofit or new. So from there, we design it and go forward with the systems that we agree on. And then electrical kind of does the same thing as what mechanical would do, is go through it with the owner and decide what systems to implement.
Yep. And Damon's team is going to make sure that that interior environment is the one that best supports your learners, essentially, at the end of the day. And with that, all that added detail, that gives us another milestone. We can do another round of estimating with more detail, of course, get more certainty on the scope and the cost, and again, revisit the schedule and check back with that core planning group to make sure we're all aligned as to next steps going forward.
And this is where a lot of the excitement happens. We go from 2D plans to 3Ds. We start visualizing the volume and the color and the texture, and we do a lot of renderings because we want everybody to be aware of what the final product's going to look like. Again, let's reduce some anxieties when we're able to. So here's an image too, where the top image is the rendering that we showed the group. We got feedback like, can we get a little more color? We once asked you to back off on color. This is a little bit too much. Can we get more color? And there's a final image of it. So not only were they able to provide feedback that we reacted to, because again, we don't want this to be our building, we want it to be your building, and then we can review all of the colors, materials, and textures with you.
So then we're moving into the final phase of the traditional design process in construction documents. The CoChazard team is going to stay ahead of steps as we go forward. We're going to start talking to city and state officials to get those preliminary reviews for any building project in, so there's no surprises when we start construction. We'll be talking about delivery method ahead of this, but whether or not we have a construction manager on board, we still like to review the project with major contractors that we know are going to be interested, get their feedback, input, and have that feedback loop as far as lead times, other concerns, build all that in ahead of time. So again, on bid day, there's no surprise, and we're off to a smooth start for construction. And then all the way through construction, that's where you see a lot of me and the CoChazard team. We'll have regular meetings, regular site observations, and over-communicate so that the decision-making isn't quite over. There's always things that come up during construction, but we'll advise you, weeks ahead of time, give you time to reflect, have discussions you need, and then get back to the design and construction team with any answers that are needed. So at the end of the day, you arrive to a ribbon cutting. You have an ecstatic community. People walk in, and they are blown away. We have exceeded all the expectations, and there's this new gem in the community that's going to serve the district for a long, long time.
And that's really kind of what we hope that we conveyed tonight, is that there's a process that you go through, and if you're following this process and you're engaging people, you can get success. You can make sure that everything matches those community needs and issues. We wanted to close out a little bit, one more loop back to who we are and what we've learned, because we've learned things during our careers, and it's actually adjusted our approach to do this and why we do this. And so what I would leave you with is, my learning is, I went to school because I thought I wanted to be an architect. I thought I wanted to design buildings. And what I found is that what's really more important for me is I like the conversation. I like the facilitation. I like working with the communities. I know other people are going to design buildings. That's what architects go to school for. It's going to look great, but if I can do the part up front and I can make sure that help you understand that, it's much more satisfying for me. And so that's why I built my entire career around this. That was a big learning for me, is I guess I don't want to design buildings. I want to help people.
One of the things I learned is that listening is really key, right? So It's listening through all those conversations and not making assumptions, asking questions like why, tell me more, and really getting to that deep-rooted understanding to best make a recommendation or best work out a plan collaboratively together. And also making sure the process is transparent, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest goals of all school districts, is having that transparency and really facilitating and having documents ready for you guys to share.
And one thing I've learned, especially at the lower grade levels, is just to sort of account for human nature. Can't pretend to know it all. You might have a plan that's laid out rationally and makes the most sense for efficiency. But if the sidewalk goes here and the kids want to go straight to the playground, that's what they're going to do. So we, again, have to listen well and take all that into account as we're designing to respond appropriately.
I got out of contracting and got into engineering because everything was always the same. So we pride ourselves on innovative designs that are lower first costs installed, lower maintenance, lower operating costs.
So we think we've answered the questions we set out to. You know who we are, you know what our approach will be, and that we will have a quality experience for you, and in the end, a successful project. So we have a couple of QR codes if you care to take your phone out. The top one will allow you to download this presentation.
The second one is a link to a video that's on our website that shows innovation in progress, or us working with Thompson School District on their innovation days. So you can see our team and hear from people that were involved in the process and really get a sense of what it looks like to engage in this as you go forward.
So thank you again. We're very excited to have this opportunity and appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you. A great conversation tonight. I know that I said that I was going to let you ask questions as we go forward, but down here we were being experts and presenting out to you. So now's the fun part, question and answer. This is more engaging.
We had a chance to review our facilities at all or not?
Yeah, just on the walkthrough, and myself, I went through the same walkthrough prior to the 2016 or so study. Yep.
From that experience, limited though it was, what do you see as the biggest challenge you face?
Again, we would start the study trying not to have any preconceptions, of course, but the two oldest elementaries, one being in close proximity to each other, it's probably difficult logistically, and then they present the most difficulties in terms of bringing them up to full accessibility and current, curriculum and education needs. So how we handle those two in combination would seem to be the biggest challenge initially.
I think I would have to agree with that when you've got two buildings like that are neighborhood schools, really that's kind of probably what was the driver in terms of their development. They're maybe not operating from a capacity standpoint that would give you better efficiency. And so a natural question would be, if we have to invest A, and we've got buildings that are this close to each other, does it make sense to look at replacement versus reinvestment? And those are emotional questions for communities, and they really have to go through the process and understand that. And I think that's going to be a big driver for your conversation as you go in addition to the early childhood question. They're often going to be overlapping. That's why it's important to understand not only the physical conditions, but all those emotional pieces that go along with it. Other questions? We can't have answered all of them.
Can you comment a bit more about your experiences with early childhood facilities? Just think back on some of the projects you did and maybe
Sure.
highlight some of the things that you thought were good to put into a project or at least to consider.
Yep. And so the first one really revolves around, is it a standalone facility, meaning it's early childhood by itself for a district, or is it integrated into the elementaries? And that raises a lot of questions around what does that parent drop-off sequence look like with the other elementary schools? How often are those kids going to engage in the building? What does that look like during the day? Because that comes with a lot of security issues as well. Some facilities we've actually looked at, do you pull kindergarten and first grade out? Are we creating a larger center if we have other capacity issues so that we can create an environment just for the earliest learners in the building and minimize that transition as they go forward? Val, some thoughts from you on some of the facilities you've done?
I think sometimes it's also the integration of adults and some, how can we also optimize this building? Maybe it's some adult programming after hours or after the traditional school hours. And really, again, the site can be a very spatial, organizational challenge. It's creating a very safe and secure play area, very close, with a lot of outside doors too, right? So I think it's kind of balancing all of that together.
It's a lot of times it's a family's first introduction to the district, and people are coming at it from lots of different points in terms of where they are personally. You've got kids at different development levels, but you also have families that maybe are first-time learners of the English language. They've got maybe a fear or mistrust of the district, and there's a lot of that adult education that happens as well. So oftentimes we find that community education and adult education is as much of an integrated part of the conversation as anything else, and looking at how can we best serve these families, these communities. It's not uncommon for us to also start to look at healthcare services as integrated into it, and mental health services as well. And so they really become a much broader discussion around how do we start to introduce families to our district, because this is the first point they have coming in. So those are some of the things that I think it's all over the board in different areas and different communities. No one is the same in terms of where they start, but a lot of the issues you discuss are similar.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's true with the wraparound learning approach, as well as the social emotional learning aspects that are being very, very much studied right now for even the early childhood levels.
During your projects, have you had experiences with communities discussing, or at least us having options to look at neighborhood schools versus grade level schools when you do this study?
Yep, absolutely. It's a big part of the conversation of are each of the buildings the same, or does it make sense for them to be grade level organization? Actually, the district I grew up in, I just had a chance a few years back to facilitate a conversation, and they had 3 elementaries that were very much grade organization structure. They had 14 sections of kindergarten, first grade, second grade in one building and moving on. And we explored this idea of, would it make more sense for this to be neighborhood-oriented versus grade-oriented? And we heard the rationale from them in terms of why they believe that. We also had the district talk about, well, what are the pros and cons around that, so that the planning group, even though they're community members, they were getting information from the administration in terms of that. And I've seen the conversation go the other way. It's really important we maintain our neighborhood identity, and then it shifts to equity. How do we make sure that what I'm getting at this building is equitable to what I'm getting at this building is what I'm getting at this building? And so you have to feel where that conversation is, but make sure that the community members involved in the discussion have good information. People with good information usually make intelligent decisions. And if we feel that they're not hearing all the information, we make sure to get more information there so that they can really stand behind that.
I'm really interested in the learning that's happening. How do you go about kind of balancing what the teachers are already doing versus innovation? I mean, how do you sell some of these concepts of learning?
Yeah, I think sometimes I can be looked at as an antagonist, kind of like, do you really need to store it in that size of a tote? Can we rethink of, how we should approach this? So it's kind of working as a team with the teachers and just kind of really telling them, let's think outside of the box. Let's also understand that this space isn't going to be your space for the next 50, 100 years, but it's going to be the district's building for the next 50, 100 years. So how do you think the next person would want to teach? And it's oftentimes, too, depending on the grade level or the age, it's really inviting in those students. The students are the biggest proponents for saying, I don't like sitting in my desk looking forward all day long. I like it too, when we can get up and move, or even if I have a chair that can kind of wiggle with me. That's some of the things I've learned.
I think another component is, instead of going to architectural continuing education courses, I go to educational ones, and most people in our office do as well. We go to the conventions and the seminars that are education-based, because that's who we're talking to. So we want to learn the language in the same way. We want to hear those issues. And so we engage in that level of dialogue and conversation so that we understand those needs more specifically than the building needs. Because again, there's people who will do the building part in our office. It's more important to understand, what are you actually dealing with here, so that you can bring that perspective in. And it's a lot easier for us to do tours of other buildings virtually now. So we can show them, what you're talking about, we can show you examples of that. We can have you talk to those people. If you want to have that person join us for a meeting, we'll bring them on so that they can tell you their firsthand experience. Again, it's not as important what the architect says, it's more important what educators have to say. And so we want to give them real examples so that they can consider that and see, oh, that makes sense, this is where it's working. And I really believe that what one district does should benefit another district. Education's a broad community, and if you're hoarding information, you're not doing the community any good. And so we try and share, here's everything that we see going on in all the different areas we are. Some of us have traveled over to Europe or to different areas to see how they're doing it there. We're doing things pretty well in America, by the way. But it's important to stay up to speed in terms of what's happening educationally.
And it's really the challenge we have is to be the creative solution finder for you, right? Again, we don't want to force something down your throats or your staff throats that isn't going to work for them. We don't want to give them a big glass box and they shut down and say, I can't teach here, and they tape up a bunch of paper. It's us really trying to create this flexible space that could be utilized maybe initially as the teacher begins training on how to teach differently, right? Because that's going to be a process. But also maybe that other teacher across the way, they're ready for it and they want to engage in it now. So it's also really engaging us to be that creative mind to provide a flexible solution that can kind of fit across the whole spectrum.
It's kind of surprising. Superintendents have a network and they go to conventions, superintendent conferences. Building managers and facilities people have a network. Principals have a network. You know who doesn't have a network is teaching and learning or curriculum-based. There's not a broad network for that. And so we've worked really hard to work with curriculum directors, teaching and learning to understand what's the big goal that you're working on here and start to build that network amongst themselves.
I think, one of the things that Yankton has done well is create the early childhood and kind of leading and self-supporting in that sense. What other, what have you done in early childhood as far as like curriculum? I mean, teaching people, what are the newest things to do in childhood learning, and what's that based on?
I think a big part of the conversation starts with if you're doing half-day sections and you have all-day school care, are the kids who are in all-day school care getting something that the other kids aren't? And getting over that hurdle with there's learning that can happen. If I choose to not have my student in that all-day care, how can I get that to happen at home? And working with instructors over what are the goals that you're doing here. And at early childhood, it's still very experiential. It's still, them dealing with more emotional needs than anything else during the day. But that's probably one of the biggest drivers around it. And then asking them, in the spaces you're in right now, what are you missing? What are you lacking? A lot of it is still revolving around those hands-on learning spaces or those exploratory spaces. And even though you can get that extended learning environment in the classroom at pre-K and all the way up through kindergarten, those extended and flex learning areas right outside the classroom are often very beneficial, and getting teachers to trust that I can still have a 4-year-old go out there and I don't have to be holding their hand for them to be engaged. And as long as I can see them and it's connected and I can hear, there's things that can happen. And so a lot of it is more around that flexibility and that freedom to know that they have a safe environment to allow the students to explore to a greater degree, and making sure that everybody's learning no matter if they're in the school or not in the school, and that we're not getting some students ahead of each other.
Definitely a lot of synergy on that open space, right? A lot of people think, oh, you know what, they're 3, they need 4 walls and a door to stay here. They don't. A lot of times it's the transition of flooring, and they're smart. These kids can really be boundaried by other things other than walls. But not having 4 walls gives opportunity for more things to spread out, for more activity to happen, for more messy space for them to work on.
We're pretty surprised at the amount of technology integration that's happening at early childhood right now. When you talk about students being able to touch stuff, the bigger technology and the more like integrated technology into wall systems and other areas, the floor systems where it interacts with cameras up at the upper level is interesting. And we're having language conversations too. The immersion schools are happening at the early childhood level in some cases, and saying we can start introducing the language as early as 3 years old, 4 years old to kids. And so it's surprising. It's that push down a curriculum again, that things we talked about with first graders and kindergartners before is now at that early childhood level. And I don't think it's going to be long before we see all-day early childhood integrated into buildings, and that's going to become the commonplace. So we have to be anticipating that. Other questions? Just what you're hoping to hear tonight?
Yeah.
Great questions.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
Pointedly, I know it's been referenced a little before, but have you actually been involved in building an early childhood center?
Oh yeah, yeah. I've probably worked on 3 or 4 over the last couple of years. And as I said, some of them are integrated to the schools, some of them are standalone facilities or as part of a district center or operations center that maybe has administrative offices and the early childhood component. But I've been involved with those. You?
Yep, I've probably done about 4 of them in the last 5 years. Firm-wide, we've tallied over 30 of them just in the last 5 years. So,
I would say it's much more common where we're having that discussion as part of an integrated curriculum with elementary schools as opposed to standalone facilities at this point. That pre-K involvement, 3 and 4-year-olds being in the building with the other elementary students and reducing that transition year as they go from younger kids to older kids. But it's very common.
So, can I ask, out of those 30, how many have been school district based?
They're all school district based.
100%.
Yes.
These are private?
Nope.
Okay.
I did a Montessori school, which was a private school as part of that, and did a Catholic school that had one. But again, part of that school system. But they've all been integrated with the educational system, the bulk of them being part of the school district.
Have you had experiences with, I noticed special ed mentioned in a couple of your slides, you haven't talked about it, incorporating or integrating special ed into these centers?
Early childhood special education mandated, but Val and I are working on a level 4 facility right now. Just did a combination level 4 transitions and ALC building recently, but most of the dialogue with special education, it doesn't matter the age level is can we please design spaces that are appropriate for the needs of students? Can we explore that? Can we look at what the size of those spaces are, what they have to do in terms of the physical therapy, the number of issues, and design appropriate spaces as part of that. But that's been as much of a push in schools is to get those spaces appropriate, right size, deal with the medical issues, the fragile issues, and understanding what the center-based locations are for each of them. And early childhood, because ECSE is mandated in most of the programs we're working on, that's an integrated part of that conversation.
And it's understanding your partnerships too, and also how you operate. Sometimes ECSE will actually push out. It'll go to other daycare centers, or it'll go to the student's home too. So it's understanding some of the nuances in how you guys operate. Frankly, special ed is near and dear to my heart. My brother has Down syndrome, and he's 35 years old. So we've been going through the special education spectrum for the whole time. And so I love working with the special education department. They're some of the most magical teachers, the patients, and they're some of the best.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much
Thank you.
appreciate it. Have a good night.
it's on all the time unless it's stopped. So, okay. Yep. Once you guys get the mics on, I'll go upstairs. Fly up there and make sure. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2. A man, a plan, a canal, Panama. Test.
Hello.
Testing. Testing. All right.
Floor is yours.
Okay, excellent. 6:01, you guys are on the ball here. Hi, my name is Tom Hurlbert. I'm principal architect at Co-op Architecture, and we're here today to present as your second firms. And I have, well, we'll introduce ourselves on the next slide, but I want to introduce our firms a little bit. Co-op Architecture is my shop. We've been working with about 35 school districts in the last 6 or 7 years. So this is old hat for us. We've been doing a lot of school stuff and a lot of master planning. We're excited to be here and tell you a little bit more about ourselves. But really, I want to tell you about a difference maker. You might not know that you have a premier K-12 architecture firm globally in your backyard in Omaha. And that's these folks from DLR. And you're going to learn and see a little bit about them. And you're going to see why they're the premier shop around. And I'm not talking about just this area. So you guys are in a lucky spot here to be only 2 hours away from these folks' office. And we've had a chance to collaborate with them several times and have had some great experiences. And so we're going to tell you a little bit about that and tell you a little bit more about ourselves. We definitely want you to be interactive. We don't want to stand up here and talk. So the way that this is set up, it's going to be a little bit built for you guys to engage us. So with that, why don't we start diving into the slides and go around. I mentioned my name. I'm originally from Aberdeen, South Dakota, St. Luke's Avera, class of 1977. Can I get a shout out for all the Aberdeen guys in the audience? Mitz was a fellow Roncalli man there. So anyway, we'll get you a reward for that later on, Mitz. Anyway, I've been doing this a long time here in South Dakota. We love it. We have a shop in Aberdeen, Rapid City, and I'm out of Sioux Falls, our office there. We have 20 people, and K-12 is really our bread and butter. And I want Tom to introduce himself. He's one of my colleagues.
Hi, I'm Tom Oster, work for Co-op Architects, and spent a lifetime in education. Recently, as a superintendent in several different school districts, former Secretary of Education, and along with bringing the education background to the Co-op Architect firm, my expertise lies in the finance of the projects, understanding what the limitations are for school districts when it comes to budget and finance, understanding the school funding formula, and what the limitations are there.
Okay, and I'm Vanessa Schutte. I'm with DLR Group. I lead the K-12 practice for our region. I like to joke with people that I was destined to design schools because I'm the daughter of 2 teachers, It's just kind of in my blood. I am an accredited learning environment professional. I've spent my entire career focusing on how space and curriculum tie together. I also teach at the University of Nebraska a course dedicated to educational facility design for architects, interior designers, and landscape architects.
Hi, my name is Todd Kwasinski. I'm also with DLR Group in Omaha. For the last 15 years or so, I've been immersed in the K-12 design world, and at this point I'll be a project manager should things move forward, and love to be a part of this process. Thank you.
Say, Vanessa, can I add a couple more comments? And I know we got to stay on track here. I know we got a timeline here, but a couple other things. I first learned about DLR when I was in Aberdeen. My dad was the contractor that built Aberdeen Central High School, and DLR was the architecture firm at the time doing that. And that's where I started to learn about what kind of influence they have in architecture, and really a big footprint everywhere, but also in South Dakota. And I would also point out that the room you're in tonight is also a DLR designed space as well. And you're going to find that as you go to any of the larger schools in this whole, well, around the country, there's a lot of them. So.
Yeah, I'll add this. So before we came up, I was talking to Curtis, who's our region leader, and he actually did construction administration on this high school. And so he did tell me that the perimeter of this building, if you go all the ins and outs, is a mile. So he did have a lot of fun during the CA process back in the 90s working through the details on this project. So with that, we'll continue back into our presentation. DLR Group has done, and Co-op has done an immense amount of master planning. These are our numbers in the last 5 years. You can see that we've done over 150 master plans. And every one of them is different, and we've learned different things on those. So I think that experience that we can bring to the table is going to be incredibly beneficial to you going forward.
Yeah, this is some of the projects. We've actually got a few more to add here in the last couple of weeks. Tom and I have been on the road, and we're also, some of these, we have some collaborations with DLR, but you can see we're doing a lot of projects. And a lot of these are repeat customers, so multiple schools in some of these locations. But we're doing a lot of work, not just all around South Dakota, and we actually are outside of state doing some big projects, but we do higher ed too. And we did master planning that you might be aware of, some projects next door at Mount Marty, which we helped do the master planning for that, as well as some projects over there. So we're very familiar and in the area quite a bit.
Okay, so now we're going to kind of explain what we're up to. You asked us to have an interactive presentation today, so that's what we're going to do. I like to call it a choose your own adventure. So we have 9 categories to talk about. So educational research. The mystery square is any question you want to ask us. Why select us? Process, schedule, and budget. Buck wild ideas. So these are some ideas that we came up with specific to you. Early learning environments, master plan experience, community engagement, and site selection. We are going to ask you to select what we talk about in the order in which we talk about. I will tell you that there are 3 that we think are really fun and would love to share with you. And those would be educational research, buck wild ideas, and early learning environments. If we don't get to everything, that's great. We want this to be interactive. And so with that, we're going to ask for a volunteer to select a topic. Oh, first hand up.
I'll take buck wild idea.
Okay, can you? All right, there are prizes, so you do get a candy bar.
Catch.
I don't know if
does this
you.
need to be a...
Ooh. Oh. Okay, so buck wild, and also please ask questions as we go. We'd love to have this be really interactive. So with that, buck wild ideas. We know that we're looking at early childhood environments, elementaries, so we wanted to start with some pretty pictures, but that's really not what we're going to focus on with the buck wild activity ideas. We're looking holistically at the Yankton schools. We have the disbursement of your existing elementary schools, and when we did the facility tours, there was lots of talk about the growth north and the desire for not only potentially a a neighborhood school up north. There's also the talk about investing in early childhood education. And so we've developed two different options, also making sure that we're thinking about the impact of the cost on that. Now, again, this is crazy wild ideas because we have not engaged you in a one-on-one conversation, but we would do that should we be lucky enough to proceed. So option one, phase one, would be to build a new elementary school / Northside Elementary School / Early Childhood Center. The Early Childhood Center would serve the entire district along with the elementary school itself. So 560 students. We would plan for about 100 pre-K students, 60 JK students, and then 200 kindergarten students. So we figured since preschool is not a requirement in the state, about half the average population of your current grade levels, and then a two-section 1 through 5. So it represents about 200 students. So that gives you that 650. Approximately 92,000 square feet, including next generation learning environments, and a total project budget of $23 million. In this option, we would look to decommission Beetle. I do want to joke, you probably are close to setting the record for the most grade levels within a facility. So it is not only challenging from an ADA standpoint, but there are a lot of other things that make that building complicated and hard to move forward. So decommissioning.
We would want Principal Mitzel's approval on something like this too.
Yes. And then transitioning Lincoln, Stewart, and Webster to 1 through 5 grade levels. So there's no need to invest in renovations and additions to those buildings because there is a potential shelf life for those buildings. So making sure that you invest going forward is important. So the second option, or do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, Vanessa, if I could, you might wonder, well, where did we come up with the $23 million figure? And we were told during the orientation on the day that we did the interviews that you folks will not be going to a bond election for this process, meaning that in our state, then your only other option is to use capital outlay certificates. Well, we know that your maximum allowable certificate is $23 million. Now, that's not how we came up with this. We obviously had to have enough square footage to take care of the plan that Vanessa just shared with you. You do have the capability of using some of your ESSER funds, your federal ESSER funds, in this process as well. But it just worked out that came up with $23 million. So we know that what we're presenting to you is at least doable. Now, it doesn't mean this is what you would ultimately want to do, but if you did, it's at least doable. You can make it happen and you can handle it financially.
The second option would be to create a district-wide early childhood center that serves pre-K1. Again, still the same number of students of 560. But then we would decommission Beetle. But the other buildings would transition to grade level buildings. We learned that there's been a lot of conversation about grade level buildings versus neighborhood buildings from the educators that we toured with. So we looked at two different options based on that input. And again, the cost is equitable. It's just what's best for you moving forward. So you will also notice that we were showing Lincoln as a 2 grade level school because it's the largest of the 2 facilities, or of the facilities that you have. So they could withstand having 2 grade levels within it. Unlike Webster and Stewart, those really work well for 1 grade level. So this is phase 1.
Vanessa, if I might.
Yep.
So you might wonder, well, why are we considering decommissioning Beetle? If the Yankton School District opens up a new facility, whether it's an early learning center or whether it's another neighborhood elementary, you only have so many general fund dollars to work with. And so adding another set of staff, another set of administration, another set of classified is just not doable within your budget constraints. So that's why the recommendation, above and beyond the fact that Beetle has outlived its useful life.
So then phase 2 would be, option A, would be to build a new 1-5 building and decommission Webster and Lincoln. So that way you keep Stewart, which is the newest of your buildings. It's centrally located, so you'd have a newer facility on the north side of town and then the south side of town. So that's, again, we're not getting into how big that is or how much that costs, because that would be considered down the road when it's financially feasible for the district. And then the option B would be to build a new grade level buildings on the south side of campus, or south side of the school. Are there any questions about why we did this approach, or, yeah?
Why would Beetle remain at
No, Beetle was decommissioned.
This is
This is phase 2. This is phase 2. So we had already decommissioned. Beetle's gone in phase 1 in both options. Sorry.
This might be 10 years, 20 years from now, but the point is that as you plan your maintenance and operations budgets, your repair budgets, and you're thinking about how much money to be putting into Lincoln and Webster, what kind of projects to do and not do, you can plan ahead. You have a vision for what you're doing 20 years from now. You might have to get some bonds paid off, not bonds, you might have to get your payments made and get this project done first. So that's why it's further down the road. Just trying to paint the broad picture so there's a plan.
Other questions?
Good question. Yeah, that's good to be clear on that.
Question on phase 1.
Yep.
What if that enrollment, are you able to go back or not?
I can try.
I think I remember. What if that enrollment, I don't feel that enrollment is
The growth? Yep.
well, like for example, you had 100 preschool and
Yep.
we can have almost 200 and most years we sit around 175.
Yeah, so good question, because most of your grade levels are around 200. The reason that we looked at it at 100 is because at this point, preschool is not mandated, so it's going to be an option in. And also many districts, and we haven't gotten into this conversation, would look at a half-day preschool rotation. And again, so we have not had those deep conversations about how this would work. Again, it's a wild idea. So if you wanted to serve 200 students, you could do that with a morning, afternoon. It is planned for the number of classroom studios to serve 100, if that makes sense. Yep. Other questions? Good one, though. Okay, we'll continue on. I gotta find my mouse again. All right, topic number 2. Yes? Educational research. Okay, awesome. And I think you might want to walk that one down. We don't want to take someone out. Yeah. Do you want to give it to Emily and she can take it over? Awesome. Okay, so I can tell you wholeheartedly, a great teacher can teach anywhere. They're special people. But what's important is we know through research that space does make a difference. Our job as educational facility designers and planners is to make your lives easier from an educational standpoint, better for the students. And I think this is really telling. So if you look at the effectiveness and set the standardization of teacher performance and student performance and take them from a non-innovative learning environment to an innovative learning environment, it has the potential to increase learning progress by up to 65%. That is an incredibly big difference. So DLR Group has really invested heavily in research in the last 10 to 15 years, and you'll see some of that here. Observational research is something that we do on a regular basis, looking at observing what's happening within a classroom. How much time is dedicated to transitions, to collaboration, and those different activities require different types of spaces. So digesting how curriculum is being delivered and the types of spaces that support that is important. But when we look, so we talk about the idea of diversity of spaces, and I'm going to point out so that at the top you'll see that SEI and the TEI. That stands for Student Engagement Index and Teacher Engagement Index. So we do have, started probably about 5 years ago, we invested in this. It's a survey tool to measure engagement within the facilities that we have designed. And the reason that we measure engagement is because it's a key indicator of success for students and retention of great teachers. So that's why we study that, and we look at what's impact in the design of our buildings can impact the engagement. We had third-party researchers that are statisticians, and we do know that we have a validated survey instrument that we utilize and have published several articles that if you're interested in, we can share. But we're going to highlight some things that we've learned from that. In addition, you'll also notice we think it's important to look at secondary research. So you'll see some highlights from neuroscience research and environmental research that we look to when we're designing facilities, okay? So one thing, we know movement matters, especially with little bodies. So we want to make sure that we encourage ease of movement within the facility and foster that. I like to talk about, like, you know, this is kind of like the agora of learning environments. There's all kinds of different spaces. We all learn differently. So why would we expect every single space within every single classroom to be the same? So creating environments that support all different types of learners and educators is important when we look holistically at a learning suite. Individualization, especially when we're talking about the growth between preschoolers through fifth graders, their bodies are vastly different in size, okay? So making sure that we have the furniture to support them as well as the environments as they grow. One thing that I like to tell everyone to do is get down on your knees and put your hands over your eyes, because that's the way that little people experience the world. Why I do this is because their peripheral vision has not developed yet. So when you look at the preschool, kindergarten kind of level, that's why kids are always like this in a space. It's because they are trying to absorb their surroundings, okay? So making sure that we're designing with that kind of idea in mind is important, especially for those littles. Any questions so far on the research? No? Okay. Trauma-informed design. This is something that I really started researching in the last year. Up to 25% of youth in America have experienced some kind of trauma. We know that there's trauma in every school. Teachers pick up that secondary trauma. So how do we design for trauma within our schools so that kids feel comfortable? We know that connection to the outdoors is important. Appropriate privacy, so the ability to, but also be able to see into other spaces is also important. So looking at how trauma-informed design can both help the students and the educators within the facilities is key. And then stimulation. We don't want a sterile environment that's really boring, but we also don't want to overstimulate, which tends to happen especially in early childhood where they have little things all over the place. So that balance of stimulation is important. I say is important a lot, sorry, I'll stop. So I guess now I'll open up to questions on research. Yes?
I just have a question. How do you go about balancing what teachers are doing now and innovation? How do you have that?
How do you balance? That's a great question. So we actually have educators on staff that are not with us here. Well, yes, additional educators. We've developed a program called BOLD, which is Bridging Operation Learning and Design. It's one thing to go from a very traditional learning environment to a new one. So making sure that we have the professional development to transition from and tie objectives, learning objectives to space. So we've been doing that with districts across the country of late, and if you would love to talk to any of the curriculum directors that we've done this program with, we'd be happy to connect you with them. It is a process. We actually do it even with buildings that we have not designed. It's just, we feel it's important to make sure, it's one thing to invest in something, you also have to, it'd be like buying a new textbook and not or even going one-to-one. You had professional development for that one-to-one or that technology. It's a tool. The building is a tool. And so making sure that you're leveraging that tool is something that we think is really important. And it also starts at the very beginning. We infuse our educators in the design process from the day one when we're interviewing staff. If we're allowed to interview students, they're a part of that as well. So yes, great question. Other questions? Okay, up next, volunteer. Yes?
I'll take Mystery Square for 5 minutes.
Ooh, Mystery Square. You get the big prize.
Get the big one.
Okay, so ask anything. We do have a question here. Can anyone answer this one? What is the second capital of the Dakota Territory?
Hint, somebody might have been there today?
What? I'm sorry, what did you say? Second.
The second. So you got the first. That's actually not correct. And yeah, we could give them the loser prize
Oh,
there.
we could. Yeah, there you go. We got it.
Who guessed Yankton as the second? Now is it?
There you go. You get the peanuts.
These
the
are
candy
circus peanuts. Nobody wants circus peanuts.
Oh, she's on circus.
Yeah, hand them over
Oh, there
here.
you go.
Well, oh, too strong. Too strong. Okay. Well, the correct answer, somebody was there today, I think. It was Bismarck.
It was a couple weeks ago.
A couple weeks ago. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so what's your question? Yes, ask anything.
How did you come up with the site location, which is another topic?
Okay, site location is very important to understand. We can jump to the site selection category. So site selection.
Good question. With site selection, we have lots of different options when we jump into a project. One of the first and foremost things we want to do is look at the local planning and zoning capacities, and so at that point we look at your local jurisdiction, we understand the basis and understanding for what's allowable in the vicinity of your building project, and so that's one thing that we want to look at. Another thing is the on-site pedestrian traffic flow. Safety is paramount, and so at this point we also want to make sure that your busing loops or busing transportation, parent drop-off, pickup, accessory routes and things like that are paramount as well. Building layout and orientation, we also want to be looking at that. And so when we look at a site in general, we want to make sure that we have an orientation for a building that's either running northwest, southeast. We want to take advantage of the natural daylight, the winds, maybe where we have shelter, where we don't, and of course then just the site access. Here we have a case study. This is Storm Lake out in Iowa, and you can tell here by some of the different circles, we had several different sites that we could choose from, and we worked with the district and the community to understand which each one had as far as different capacities. And so you can see there were some that were outside of town a little bit, and there's some that were inside, and they had some of their challenges.
I think it's also really important with this process to engage the community, and that was a big part of this in the district. So we did some dot polling with community meetings of different colored dots for their, like, whether or not it's their first favorites, first or second or third. along with, sorry, I just jumped in on you. So I think that making sure that it's not a decision that is a small group, getting input from a lot of people is important. Sorry.
And with that dot polling, what we try and do is we have a site selection matrix. And so when we jump to that slide, you'll see here, as we start looking at the building orientation, that one building looks like it's been rotating quite a bit. And so we try and evaluate where indeed exactly on that site it becomes the most effective.
Yeah.
And here, as mentioned, that site selection matrix. And so we see all the different sites, and we have all the different grades, and we either have it 1 through 5 or 1 through 4, depending on the different categories. And you can see here that we look at the site development, we look at site due diligence, and so with that said, we start looking at all those costs that come with it, and we ultimately have everybody grade those different sites independently, and we come up with this matrix here, and you can kind of see how it starts to funnel or point us into a couple different sites, and we can talk about it from there.
I think one thing that's really important about the site matrix is that before anything is graded, we work with the district on weighting what's important. So different categories within this matrix have different values depending on the district we're working with. So we set up that weighted criteria before anything is evaluated to ensure that you have an unbiased assessment of the sites that were looked at.
Is acquisition part of your matrix?
Like, yeah, so that's why you never want to go public with the final, like the top site. So, because obviously the cost goes up. So we recommend that negotiations start with the top 2 or 3 and are working simultaneously, knowing, as long as they're suitable sites that work well. But yes, that is important because some are easier to obtain than others, and so that does come in a requirement. If we know that it's not going to be attainable, obviously schools can do eminent domain, but a lot of school districts don't want to do that, and so that becomes one of the criteria within the assessment is how easy is it to acquire that site.
One of the processes we used for one of your neighbors to the north, very similar situation, looking to build a new elementary school. The school board had it nailed down to about 6 or 7 potential sites. And so we worked on their behalf and talked to all the landowners and found out, A, were they willing to sell, and B, would they be interested in having a conversation with a developer outside of the school district property that they wanted. As you would expect, developers get really, really excited when a new elementary school goes in because the houses just pop up almost automatically around that, so which can also help in the purchase of the land. We negotiated a parcel of land on behalf of the school district and actually purchased the land at market price. There was no inflation because the school district wanted it, and I think that happened for 2 reasons. The conversation with the developer on the side and the fact that the landowner did not know that they were the #1 site.
We've also, and Tom has done a fabulous job at that role, actually going up and knocking on doors. But it's also important, again, to reiterate, working with your city, if you're going to talk about some site that's a little further out, and just understanding the sewer and water situation, obviously, is kind of a major thing, because that also will obviously affect any development that happens along with a school and affects the overall cost too. So.
Okay, next category.
Community engagement.
Okay, community engagement. He wanted some candy too.
Share, right?
Oops.
Went softer that time.
Todd's gonna get fired.
All right, community engagement. You can see here at this first slide, you can see we involve students, teachers and staff, community, and board members alike. With that said, the first photo here you're seeing, what we try and do is really involve our students. And so the student population, whether they're small or large, you can see here there's high school students touring a recent construction project. And so a construction project of the district, we would then take some of those kids out there that are in that line of work or field of study that they want to study and get involved a little bit more. Likewise, on the left there, you're seeing a wall that has a cool little CMU brick pattern. We've also engaged our students as well to help design some of the exterior of the building and maybe even some of the interior of the building. So as we start to get more immersed into the project, that's one thing that we like to do is get those students involved.
Yeah, I think one thing that's important since we're talking about elementaries, I looked for a picture and I couldn't. We were replacing, this is a project that I worked on that I think is really fun. We were replacing an older elementary school, and so we did a project with all of the K-5 building where each grade level, they wrote a little thing about what they loved about their current school and what they wanted to see in their new school, along with drawing pictures. So the kindergartners could draw the pictures better than writing the stories, but it really impacted what we did in the future. There were several kids who mentioned wanting a tree fort, and so actually in the media center that was designed, we actually have this little tree fort that kids can read in. But my favorite one was they wanted alligators on leashes all over the school. So it's really entertaining to see what you get, but it also, you do get valuable input from what excites them about their school.
And speaking of what excites everyone at school, it's also about the teachers and staff. So you're seeing here some of the photos. In general, what we try and do is get them to kind of let go a little bit and understand what they really, really, really want to see in their school. And so we start to do that with, you can see here some of the building blocks and how that school would start to look and how it would feel, whether it's 2-story, 1-story. You're starting to see some of that. We also do sticky notes. There's different visioning exercises that we go through, and those sticky notes will start to understand as we start to call upon some internal feelings about how they deliver their curriculum. And so you can see here some of those efforts with other districts. And we'd like to do the same with yours.
As well as observational research. I think that's really important because a lot of teachers they know what they know. And so when you observe how they're making their space work, you can see things that they may be able to leverage. Well, you had a question? Yeah.
So just to follow up with the community involvement, what have been your experiences working with communities and school districts on grade level centers compared to neighborhood schools? Because I see that being part of the focus for this.
Yes, and we were actually, I think the next one is community involvement, and that pulls right into that. There is a lot of information that needs to be shared with communities about the difference between a community school versus a grade level school. Why? What are the pros and cons of each? And having outreach in each attendance center is important so that those families know why you're considering those changes. I think that's one thing that's important. Get the information out about the pros and cons, but there's also, where did it go? There we go. Surveying. There's one thing to engage people in an open dialogue in the public, but you don't always get every voice. You don't always get all the opinions. You'll hear the loud voices, not the quiet ones. And so if we do engage a survey, whether or not it's you bring in and do a true survey that's completely blind and did it, the call, or just a general survey, those are things that we can help you with to get that input. You want to add to that?
Yeah, one of the things that's really important is having the conversation with the school board first, and making sure that if the board wants to survey the community on a very specific topic, that they understand that if the survey results come back and say X, and the board ultimately decides to do Y, that's going to be very unpopular, way more unpopular than it would have been had they just done Y in the first place and not asked. Because as you would expect, people would say, if you're not going to do what the majority of us said to do, then why did you ask? And so it's very important to understand and get the board's approval on what will the survey ask and what are you looking for coming out of that. Now, the easy ones on grade level versus neighborhood schools are grade level schools take away inequities that exist in each community. But neighborhood schools are walkable in many cases. And so now you have a transportation issue when you go to grade level schools. And so there are, as you know, obviously, there are some real advantages to one over the other and real disadvantages. So again, we've got that expertise and know-how, but the first thing we would want to do before we even get that far is visit with the school board and say, what vision do you have? And do you have any preconceived notions here, or do you want to just carte blanche this survey?
Yeah, because I backed over I'm all back up. I jumped to it. The involvement of the school board, you kind of talked on that a little bit, but I think it's really important. One thing that we like to do is interview one-on-one the board members. You represent your community, your elected officials. We want to hear from you, just as we want to hear from the educators within the school district, your vision for what you see, and we bring all of that information together. Yeah.
And being in your backyard, we'll be boots on the ground in the local cafe trying to get and extract that community feel.
We've got just a few more minutes here, Vanessa, so we should get to the goal line.
Then can we jump to do you mind if I pick our next category? Because I think it's fun. Sorry. Early learning environments. That's kind of been our focus today. But it's really something that's passionate for me, because I really do feel like it's our, teachers give to future generations, and as architects designing educational facilities, that's how I see us giving to future generations, is getting kids excited to learn is something that's really powerful. And so understanding our early learners and how their brain develops and who those early learners are is important. I already talked to you guys about the blinders and the knees, but so keeping that in mind when we look at the design of this facility. This I'm going to highlight, this is actually something that we learned on a project Pathfinder Elementary School. It was a McConnell finalist last year. And one thing that we noticed, and those CRs stand for classrooms, just so you know, is we watched what happened throughout the day. We watched all those little kids getting in line and going to art, going to lunch, going to recess, going to play. And what does that equate to? Lost instruction time. I mean, it's like herding cats to get kids to go places. And so all of that adds up throughout a day. So what happens if we modify that? What happens if we bring the spaces to the students, distribute the eating, distribute the reading, distribute the specials, intervention, and the play, so that we actually reduce the amount of time between spaces? Could we increase the educational time throughout the day? That was our hypothesis. We were thinking that we could save some space or some time in the day. Let me go. So this is the actual floor plan where you can see the spaces dispersed. Once the building was designed, we did go and had observational study done to look at the impact of the design of the facility, and we learned that we saved over a week in transition times in the school year. So instead, you didn't have to increase a calendar, but you added like a week and a day to your school calendar just by the way the building was laid out. So that's why we say observation is important. It's one thing to have an hypothesis, but to go back and study it and prove that it actually did work and it is functioning is something that's also powerful.
Vanessa, I would just add to that's 1 week plus every year. And so that's 6 or 7 or 8 weeks of schooling for each elementary child. And we know in education that any child that's not up to speed by the end of the 3rd grade struggles. We've got the research to show that they struggle all the way through high school. But students that are on pace at the end of 3rd grade do extremely well all the way through. So time on task and not lost transition time is huge for our elementary kids.
Yeah. I have one more case study to share. This is the Omaha Henry Dorley Zoo educational facility. They do have an early childhood center and high school actually in the on campus. And the idea behind this school is active distraction, learning from their environment and their inquisitive nature. So it's like purposefully distracting kids so that they can ask their questions. And I'm going to this next one. I love this. It's kind of funny. So this is a dung beetle. The director of the zoo showed this picture to us of this dung beetle rolling this ball of dung around. And why am I showing this to you? This is how they teach physics to their elementary kids. They actually, we designed it so that they can actually, eventually you'll see them roll this ball over a log. How do you teach kids about physics and give them the challenge of rolling large balls over obstacles so that they can learn through play and through their environment? And it's also important to look at the details of the spaces. So you can see the frit in here. That's the glass to help the glare within the building. Those are all native species of Nebraska. And there's a little key on the wall so the kids can go learn and find those spaces or those little animals within the space. So again, the idea of learning through play and distraction is important. So that's, I think we're up against time.
We are pretty close.
Yeah.
I think we got a minute or two left,
Okay.
and we don't have to hit all of them. But maybe I should do, I don't know if we have any questions here first, or I could do kind of a wrap up here. What do you think? Any other questions, quick ones we can do?
I just have a quick one. You showed the map of all the projects in South Dakota.
Yep.
Do you have enough people on your team to take on another project?
Well, that's a great question, and here's the beauty of it. Our biggest market is K-12, but the great thing about this on a master planning standpoint is having a global leader in your backyard that's going to help provide the horsepower. We're going to have a project manager involved in this project for sure from beginning to end. They've got 1,200 people and their headquarters is in Omaha. Nobody has the experience and the horsepower, and not to mention they're 2 hours away. So that will not be a problem.
I also think, all those stars are projects that we have done in the past. So those are not all current active projects that we're working on. Those are projects that we may have completed in the past, like this project here was done in the 90s. So it shows that the breadth of what we've done across the state. But yeah, we have horsepower.
We have a saying in our shop that says that every single client we have has to be the most important client that we have. Otherwise, we shouldn't take on that client.
Anything else? I could do a quick big finish. Of course, I did do the lead role in 2 community theaters up in Aberdeen, so this is I'm totally suited for my big finish here. Get the fireworks ready, Emily. No, we didn't hit on a couple of these, but I do want to just reiterate what I just said before about the difference makers here, and that includes having somebody like DLR. There's a little saying that I try to take credit for, a quote. If you're on the moon and you miss your landing spot by a foot or two, no big deal, right? But right now we're on planet Earth, and we're going to put a rocket together and try to figure out how to land on the moon with this master planning. So we're getting our plans together, and if we set up a foot to the left, we're going to miss the moon by 10,000 miles. The decision you make right now is the most important decision you're going to make right out of the get-go, right out of the gate, and picking the right team. I think you're in a unique position to pick probably one of the most experienced teams, and we're lucky to be tagging along with them. I think we do as much master planning as anybody in South Dakota, but to have a firm like DLR to be collaborating with is a real special opportunity to have somebody of that caliber here with us. And I think we've just got a really great team, and we would love to be a part of this project. It's our bread and butter, a huge market that they focus on and we focus on. So we're really thrilled for the opportunity to be here. It's a great, who knows what the future holds for you folks, but it's going to be exciting. And you've got a lot of opportunities, and we would love to be a part of it.
And I want to thank you guys for your time. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
button on the top. Now we're live.
Okay.
Testing. There we go.
I heard you.
Test.
So when I want to talk, do I hold this?
Test.
No,
1,
just
2.
it's a on and off mute. So right now it's muted. So when you want to talk, just
Test, test. Yep.
there you go.
Okay.
And unless you read it,
Test, test.
you can just
Okay.
leave it on. But that's up to you.
Oh yeah, I
And
can
just
probably do that.
It's an on and off kind of thing.
And I'm not too loud.
I'll adjust a little bit up there. Like I
Okay.
said, as long as it's
Because
not
I usually start
right in
talking
your face.
loud when I'm presenting.
As long as it's not right next to your nose. And it's, we'll catch all that.
You'll yell at us.
I can keep a little bit more.
He's gonna
works magic. If the lights start flashing in the booth, we'll know something's wrong.
I can yell pretty loud too.
Good.
All right. Think we're good there? So nice.
All right, test. Ooh, that's warm.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
can
you're
put
loud.
just a hair probably. That way you don't.
Testing.
I look good. Okay.
Thank you. Me too.
So,
Mute yourself.
this is what's on the screen. That's the next one. So if you want to look over and reference on this one, that's on the screen. That's our next.
Okay, but we're way out. Where are we all standing? Okay, choose this. We're gonna pass this around.
Yep. And it's hot. It's working. So.
Okay. Yeah. Well, hello.
Hello.
Thank you for inviting us in, and we're excited to be here. And if it's okay, I think we're on time, so we can get started. Okay. So we are JLG Architects, and Katie, Dan, and myself. We are very honored to be here. This is a very exciting project for you guys in the school district, and everything that you're planning and what you'll be doing. So our presentation tonight will go through our introductions, tell you a little bit about JLG, talk about your project, some projects that we've done in the past, and some ways that we think that we would be an excellent teammate with you in your future plans. So our team is the four of us, or the three of us, and then Jim Holbeck. Jim Holbeck is not able to be here tonight. He regrettably had a vacation planned prior to us hearing about what night the interview was, so he was not able to attend. You guys that know him, call him, text him, tell him he's missing a good time tonight, please.
Yep.
Yeah, harass him. Tell him that we said to. So I am Catherine Deckinga. I'm an architect out of the Sioux Falls office, and my role on this project would be project manager. So what that means is you see me here, you'd see me at every single meeting, all the way through to the end of the project. I'm the one that runs the project, and then I bring in the experts when they're needed at the right times for community engagement, for planning, for facilitating, and so that includes engineers and education specialists. And so our education specialists are Dan and Katie, and I'll have them introduce themselves.
Well, I'm Dan Miller, and I would be the principal in charge on the project. And also within JLG, I am the principal that's in charge of our K-12 practice studio. So my involvement in the project would be a lot of the upfront master planning, the work, the conceptual work, and then also making sure that Catherine and her team have all the resources from JLG to do what we need to do to make your vision happen. So.
And I'm Katie Becker. I'm an educational planner and architect with JLG. And I'm really excited to get to work with you guys to understand what your vision is for your district, and not only and carry that out from the planning perspective, and then through the design process, talking with your teachers and your students and your community and understanding what they're excited about and what they're looking for in their school buildings.
And I forgot to tell you why I'm excited. One of the reasons I'm excited is because my husband's family, actually all of my husband and his siblings, most of them graduated from this school. So it's fun to come down here and get to see them and talk to some of the people that they got to be in school with and were educated by. A little bit about JLG. We are a 150 plus firm of employees across 4 different states, and we are an ESOP. So that means that it's an employee-owned firm. Every person that you work with is an owner. And why that's important to you, it means that we're all invested not only in the projects that we work on, but also the business side of it. So it's a good balance for each employee to understand all of that. And so we like to talk about that and let you know that is one of the things that's important about JLG. The other thing is we're very excited about all the awards that we win. And so you'll see some of them listed on the bottom here. One of them that is pretty exciting is we've been rated one of the top 50 places in the United States to work by our employees. So again, it means that we have happy employees, they enjoy working for us, which means, again, they're invested in the projects, they enjoy the clients, and we really produce excellent work. So we have our large office, 150 employees, and then it's broken down into different studios. So you're talking to now 3 people from the K-12 studio. Jim is also involved in the K-12 studio. We have work across multiple states, so the dots on the screen show all the different locations that we have worked and done K-12 work. We are in and have been, we have been in 95 plus districts. And then in the top corner, you'll see that we've been rated 64th in the nation for K-12 design. And that's also important to you because that means that you are getting a national expert at a local level. We have offices in Sioux Falls and then of course other places, but we're able to bring in our national expertise to provide you with that experience. And in the last 5 years, we have $593 million worth of K-12 design work done just in JLG. So again, it's bringing all that expertise from all those projects back to you. So a little bit about visiting your schools. We were able to come down and tour and see your different facilities. And we wanted to, even though Jim couldn't be here, we wanted him to talk a little bit. So we did record a little bit of a video. You guys know Jim. He has a lot to say. So we did try and pare this down a little bit, but it's about 4 minutes. He has some great things, so we'll let him talk, and then we'll get right back to you guys.
Hello, Yankton. Wish I could be there. Instead, I'm down here suffering in Texas on the beach, and my wife and I had set this vacation up a long time ago before you guys set your night, and if I canceled it, I don't think the boss at home would be very happy. So, but I sincerely wanted to be there. Wanted to share with you this exciting journey that you guys have going on. I've told many people in South Dakota that I had the best job in education when I was superintendent in Harrisburg. A lot of that was the fact that we had the excitement of building schools. I figured that I was involved with building about 9 major building projects in over 12 years there. Not sure if any other superintendent in the state of South Dakota came close to building that many schools. I found that after I left a couple years ago that I had learned so much about building schools that I didn't know when I first started. I believe that experience is so valuable. I learned what worked, but probably more than anything, I learned what didn't work when it came to design, using time to get the public involved, and the process of the construction of the building. I thought it was natural that now I work to help other schools through this process to help them save time, trouble, and sometimes money. Just knowing what building materials that work best for wear and tear as well as being attractive and cost effective is very valuable for a school. We put up beautiful schools in Harrisburg at some of the lowest cost per square foot. We want to do the same sort of thing for you in Yankton. Knowing design concepts that work best for supervision cuts down on discipline problems for your administrators. Implementing safety designs in your building is a peace of mind for your parents and for the students and your staff in your school. You know, I toured some of your facilities a few years ago when we were going to build CTE facilities in Harrisburg. I was impressed with your secondary and middle schools. You have beautiful schools there. But now it's certainly time for Yankton to take care of your elementary building needs. I could give you my own opinion on what you need to do exactly as far as the number of buildings that you need, grade levels in each building, whether you should build new or remodel your current facilities. So can the team members from JLG. But in reality, it's not us that needs to decide, it's you. You as a board, as your administration, as a staff, and as a community You need to decide those final answers. JLG has studied your buildings and knows exactly which buildings are worth salvaging and which buildings would be a money pit to remodel. I will share that for sure, you need to build at least one new elementary school, with early childhood programs included in that building. What can you afford to do now, and what will you have to put off until later? It's going to be a tough decision that you're going to have to make. I don't believe one elementary school being built will be enough to solve the deficiencies you currently have in your buildings. If you were to choose JLG, which we did at Harrisburg, to design our last elementary school there, you would get that same team of very qualified design team members. But in addition, you'd get my services too, to help you from the beginning of this process to the day that students walk through the doors. I kid you not, that process is very exciting to me, and that's why I'm working for JLG. I applaud you for the vision to include your plans an early childhood program. That's going to be an envy of most schools in the state of South Dakota. Your inclusion of this important and impacting program will benefit parents, students, and the community of Yankton. Again, I'm sorry I'm not there, but I'd welcome you to contact me anytime if you have further questions. Good luck in your process.
So as you saw, he said contact him anytime, so feel free to. But we're excited to have Jim on our team. We really like his experience that we can pair with our expertise. And so we've got the national, again, experience, plus his knowledge of what's happened locally as well. So like we said, Jim has toured your buildings. We have ideas about what could happen, but we really want this to be collaborative and to be a teamwork. So we really want the input of the community. We want the input of the boards and administration to come together and have a plan that works well for everybody. And so that's what we're going to talk about too, is how we can help facilitate that and how we can help you work through some of that in the community. And so bringing all of that together really creates you need the right tools, and we really do believe that JLG can provide those to you. So the next part of this presentation is going to be a lot of Dan and Katie telling you about a lot of the expertise that they bring to the project. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Catherine. So community engagement, I mean, it really starts at that point, not really thinking about buildings and facilities per se, but what does your community expect from you as a district, from your educational system? What is your vision? What is your community's vision about where education should go? And what you want to do is make sure you wrap a learning environment around that and start with that at the basis. So starting the process, it's really a flow of steps that you go through to make sure that nobody is left behind through this process. And we want to start with listening. Just like Jim mentioned and what Catherine has mentioned too, it's really about what your vision is and what your community's vision is and what your expectations and priorities are. And then we build from there. So what we like to do is start with listening, starting with your teachers and your students and your staff, really having them behind the vision of where you want to go is the most critical piece. And we start with them, and then we expand it out to listening with your community too. And then we do that in a series of follow-up listening sessions and making sure that we're hearing what we think we heard. Now, concurrently with that, we're also looking at the facility needs, defining what your needs are physically. And that includes facility assessments. That includes compiling the assessments and the understanding of what you already know about your facility and us incorporating that into what we see. And not only is it just physical conditions, like keeping the water out and heating and cooling properly, but it's also, is the space that you have, is it educationally adequate? So we're going to do an ed adequacy study to make sure that the spaces you have are right-sized. They're tracking where your enrollments need to go, so you have the space to handle the enrollments as you grow. And it also is giving you the space to work and teach and learn in an environment that fits the pedagogy and fits the curriculum and what you're doing in your learning spaces too. So once we have all that together, from the community, the listening, from the needs assessment, and you combine that together, we get to the next step where we're really looking at generating those options. That's the fun part. That's when we can sit down with you, sit down with your committees, even sit down with your staff and students, and even bring in the community and wrestle with those actual design processes together. It's really dependent on how far you want to go in engaging the community in that design process, whether we work just simply with your committee or whether we bring in key stakeholders. What we want to do is make sure that we're not generating solutions that step outside the bounds of what your community is expecting of you. Those have to go hand in glove. So once we have those options created, what we want to do next is now come back to the community and say, this is what we heard from you originally. Now that we have these solutions and these options, this is what we think we heard, and this is what we think you are expecting us to do because we heard you. Are we close? Now, I'm oversimplifying it, but really that's what the process is coming back and giving them the opportunity to say, yes, you got it right. Or, you know what? We were really thinking this. And what was your community really thinking? And it's a process of going, it's rinse, wash, repeat. If we're hearing something that is slightly out of line, we refine it, and we go back and we bring it back through the process. So when we ultimately get to the point where we're ready to implement the plan, we have the community behind us. And if they've been involved in those listening sessions and even some of the early on design conceptual sessions, they have buy-in too because they've had a say in it. So what this process ultimately can look like for communicating with the public is rather than a town hall setting where you have everybody sitting out on the bleachers in the gym and somebody gets the mic and you have 100 people out there, but the one person, he's saying his piece. You have 99 other folks out there that aren't getting the opportunity to say what they want to say or ask the questions they want to ask. We like to break it down into a smaller group setting where it's an open forum. People can come and go as they please. We get the information to them in small groups, and what we want to see happen is let you, as administrators, as board members, as staff, and even as key stakeholders, community leaders, explaining that to your neighbors and friends. And we can be your resource to help you do that and be right there with you, but they can hear from you what your district's vision is for the community and for your facilities. And then it will resonate with them. Once we get to that point, then we're finally ready to implement the planning. So what could this look like on a timeline? This can happen as quickly as 6 months. It can happen as quickly as, or take as long as a year and a half, 2 years. But oftentimes, we would want to dial this in with you. Many times we find that districts want to look at about anywhere from 8 to 10 months in a process like this, where we start with the listening, and we first start out with just hearing and listening to them, and then we come back a month later, and we want to come back to your staff and your community and say, okay, this is what we heard last time, and we've compiled it. Do we have it right? We're doing that while we're doing the assessments, defining the needs there on the second step, and then generating the options, multiple concepts, because whatever we don't generate as an option, if it's a viable option, you'll probably have somebody in the community coming forward and say, have you thought about this? So we need to give ourselves the opportunity to look at all those options. And constantly, it's that like that teeter-totter there. It's a balancing. Where is your community's appetite for their cost threshold versus what you need as a district, what you need for your facilities, and balancing that. And when you have that balance, then you know that when you get into the communications portion of it and you come out and communicate to the public where you're going with your plans, they're on board with it because you've let them engage through the process. So that being said, what is some of the educational opportunities that are already happening out in education that you're dealing with, and how can we let that?
We know that job markets are changing, right? Things are being offshored and automated. So how do we prepare students for that future? We know that ultimately it's not what you know, but what you can do with what you know. Our technology and the way technology has played a huge part in all of these changes. The way that we access information has changed. We used to go to a book shelf and grab information off there. Now it's, like I said, at our fingertips. We used to have rows set up in classrooms, and now it's much more open and much more free for students to learn together and at their own pace. Our spaces have to reflect this change as well. So what does this look like for our early learners? We know early childhood education is a huge piece of this for you guys. Well, we need to understand what are the key components for students at that age range, and that includes making sure they're ready for kindergarten, making sure that they develop independence and that they've got lifetime success moving through school and are lifelong learners. We have to make sure that we're balancing the skills that they need, all in the same space. Let's remember this. All of the early childhood stuff usually happens in one room. So we've got to give them space for being noisy and for being quiet in the same room, for being messy, for being dry, for space that allows them to be independent, but also ones for them to ask help. And what this looks like is a series of learning centers within the classroom, which takes up a lot of space, but it's providing different spaces throughout that room so that they can continually be successful. What does this look like as you get a little bit older? Elementary, even into middle and high school. Well, it's a lot of the same principles, right? But it changes a little bit. It's recognizing that learning is personal. It's not mass customized anymore. It's recognizing that learning happens everywhere. This is Learning Commons in Discovery Elementary in Grand Forks. And you can see just in this one space, you get 3 different groups of kids learning there in their own way. It's recognizing the power of flexibility and adaptability for spaces. Look at the same space, changing out the furniture. It goes from a computer lab to a play space really pretty quickly, just based on the furniture that's there, but still the one room. Looking at the opportunities for collaboration so that students can do one-on-one peer tutoring, and there can also be small groups with teachers as well. Recognizing the power of project-based learning. This is the Innovation Academy in Williston, North Dakota, and they're in a hydroponics lab in one of their classrooms that next year will probably be a robotics lab, or maybe it'll be a music room. They don't know yet, but it's a flexible space. And ultimately, it comes back to technology, making sure that it's seamlessly integrated into our buildings so it can be seamlessly integrated into your curriculums. Because all of this, whether it's our little learners or older learners, it comes down to this. Learning is not so much a sage on the stage anymore. It's a lot more a guide by the side. Students working together, teachers working with students, and we have to make sure our spaces support those as well.
So if we know that is where education is going, and really what it's doing, it's just simply trying to stay ahead of technology. Give our students, give our next generation the opportunity to be productive and be part of the workforce and not be outsourced or put out to pasture by the computer. So what that requires of us is we still need to teach all the core curriculums, the reading, writing, and arithmetic, but now we're also teaching our students soft skills, how to work with each other, interpersonal connections, the 4 C's. You know, it's the things that the computer can't do. If an algorithm can't do it yet, we're going to have to rely on our students to do it, and they're the next generation, and that's what they need to learn. And so the social learning is just as important as the intellectual learning too. And so we're looking at all of this, and it's asking us to take a fresh new look at what we're doing with our educational environments, with those learning environments. And so what we've been doing and studying within the K-12 practice studio, we even gear our own professional development, our continuing education. It's not really based on architecture. It's actually we go out and we learn what you're learning and what your teachers are learning and looking at what's coming next in education because it defines how we design the spaces for their kids in the future. And what we're finding is a way, like I talked about, balancing that cost threshold and priorities versus what we really need, is we're looking at what have we been doing with educational design up to this point that we can take advantage of and put to use and get more efficiency out of it to give us a future-proof 21st century educational learning environment. And what we're seeing is it's the space in between. If you look at your facilities, what is the space that we have running everywhere in the facility, but yet, for the most part, was not designed for any functional educational value? Circulation. Where is the space where you have a lot of your behavioral issues? In the circulation space, in the restroom space. But what if we could take that space? What if we could actually take the learning environment outside the 4 walls of the classroom, extend it out into this space that we're already building into our buildings anyway, or that's already in our existing buildings, and make that space usable to your teachers, to your staff, to your students for the education that they're already endeavoring in, and make it a learning conducive environment. Actually, if I would venture to say, if we're going up and down your hallways here during the day, we're probably going to see kids out on the floor with their Chromebooks or in small groups, and we're going to see it. It's happening anyway, so let's design for it. So what if we just took that square footage, and what if we invested in it just a little bit outside the classrooms, and we made it a space where it's an extension of the classroom? where you can have students that are in the classroom and outside the classroom, but they're still, the teachers have eyes on them, and they can be working in groups and doing multiple things in multiple venues at the same time. Studies have shown that we as human beings, we start losing our attention in about 20 minutes in. We have what? Block periods or 7-period days are typical. So for 50 minutes, how do you keep your students' attention? Well, you change the venue, you get them active, you work them through multiple exercises. And this is what allows us to do that. The other thing that we're learning, and we've all been dealing with this for the last year, the pandemic has really proven to us that yes, we can utilize technology to the max of its ability. And you know what? Through distance learning, or hybrid learning, which we've all had to experience in some form or fashion, the freedom that gives us and the flexibility that gives us, it's great. But guess what? There's a nasty downside. A lot of our students, and in some cases the majority of our students, they miss the collaboration and the connection of being in that fixed location learning environment. So now we're asking ourselves, how can we design facilities that give us the best of both worlds? And again, I'll come back to maximizing the space that's already in your building. If we can extend the classroom outside those 4 walls, we're giving ourselves more venues, we're giving ourselves more opportunities to do multiple different types of teaching strategies, and we're also giving ourselves the ability to not cram all the kids into the same 4 walls. If you have to social distance, we can make it work with getting more people into the building if we have the space to do it. The other thing that you'll notice is now you can start to create a community within the school, a school within a school, where you can start having, whether it's like-minded academies or at the younger grades, like we're looking at elementaries, you can do it by similar grade levels, or you can actually do cross-age learning too. So for example, Discovery Elementary that Katie mentioned earlier, this is the way we had designed this facility. You can see the areas in blue there. That's that extension of the classroom idea. That's the space where now you have kids that are interacting with other kids and other teachers, and you have that professional learning community where it's more than one adult, more than one educator that's engaging with those students, and it's a team effort. The other thing that's great about spaces like this is you can have the opportunity to have cross-age learning. Now, in this particular layout, this was a couple of prototype schools that we've been working on for Williston Public Schools. And you can see here again, you've got that community within the community. It gives you an extra level of security. Typically in our traditional schools, your security points are where? It's the front door, and it's the classroom door. But if we can break the facility down to smaller communities, and you can keep your students there for the majority of the day within that cohort, now you have an extra security point within your facilities too when it comes to, heaven forbid, an active shooter situation or something like that. But in Harrisburg, for example, we looked at a similar model, but they did it rather than doing by like-minded grades, with 4th and 5th together, 3rd and 2nd together, kindergarten, 1st together. They looked at it doing 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and then they go to the next community, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and now you're getting older kids learning with younger kids across in that flexible learning common space. And so it really comes down to what Jim was saying, and what Jim would help do is, what is the learning strategy that you want to implement in this opportunity that you have? Let's start there. And if that means coming back and modifying your current facilities to make that work, or building facilities that wrap around that, that's the second step. But the first step is getting the learning strategy correct. Another example, Watford City Elementary, and do you have your phones on you? If you want to get your phones out, you can see some of the graphics with a QR code. We'll actually do graphics like this. This is pre-designed work that we can actually, again, coming back to communicating to the community, we would put QR codes on graphics like this, get them on your website, or even create micro websites that your site can link to. And then if you can snap that code, and if you can spin around, you can get a feel for the space. Now, let's face it.
Media center.
This happens to be the media center, but we can do this for basically any space in the building. And I'll tell you this, not everybody reads plans. We like to think everybody does because we love plans and drawings and all that sort of stuff. But for your teachers and your staff, there's always a bit of nervousness about change. And key question, how much storage am I going to have? Well, let's virtually walk them through the building and give them the feel for that, to feel what it's like. Was that QR code working for you? Great.
We got another
Well, here's another one for you. This facility, now I'll take it a step further, talking about new, fresh, and different ideas. And here it comes back to, it's got to be based on what your learning strategy is. What if we actually got rid of the four walls to the classroom? If you look at this layout, the darker blue areas there, those are where the main cohort of these students, these are 5th and 6th graders in this particular facility. This is where they would be about 60 to 75 students. And in the photo, you can see that's how that space actually works. They're actually working in small groups, and they're working through activities. And then, rather than having the kids in the classroom the bulk of the time and they go out and break out into a flexible space, this is the opposite. They're out in the flexible space doing what they're doing. And then when they have focused lecture time or focused activity time with the teachers, they go into the smaller group rooms in groups of a dozen or so, and they work them through that way. So they kind of reverse the idea. And this facility, taking it a step further, this was actually their old pool building. And so we actually filled in the pool, and the big open wide auditorium space, we put in a second level, and then we stacked this. There's 2 floors of this going through there, and it saved the district about half the cost of if they would have built new. And so the QR code, I think what that'll give you is the front lobby area there. You'll see some of the theming. You'll see like starter blocks from the pool up on the wall, and the blue and the text, and we really played off the theming of it being the pool facility, and the community loved it. The donors got involved with it, and we actually worked the donors into the graphics, so it was a lot of fun. So that being said, what we're excited to bring to the table to you is both our capacity and our speed, which Catherine talked about, but more importantly, some of the ideas that we're just anxious to hear from you, and how can we apply that to the learning environment that we can create together for an innovative space that's fresh, that's new, that sets you up for future-proofing where education can go here in Yankton. And then ultimately, as Catherine said too, we're right here. We're living in the communities and in the regions where we've grown up. We're small-town people by nature. But when you look at our expertise, our competition and firms of our size and expertise at a national level, they're coming out of Minneapolis, Chicago, Denver. But the way we operate, we stayed out in the communities, out in the upper Midwest and the smaller communities where we want to be. And that's why we do that, because we want to be connected to our customers and to our clients, which are you. And so you get that combination uniquely with us that I don't think you'll find anywhere else. And then finally, we want to be your trusted partner to help you connect so you can be the trusted partner of your community. Not for just this master planning effort, but going beyond that for years to come. So we thank you for your time, and we know that there's probably a lot of these things in this presentation that maybe have your head scratching and you say, they got to explain that better. Please ask us. Or if there's something that intrigued you that you want to talk about more, please pepper us with questions. We'd love to cover any topics you'd love to cover at this point. Sure.
How do you balance what teachers are already doing in their classroom and innovation?
Okay. The question was, how do you balance what teachers are already doing in their classroom with innovation? I would say if we go back and look at some of these floor plans of these facilities, I'll go back to one of these, like this one, for example. If you look at this layout, if you just looked at the space between, in each one of those communities, if you looked at the space that's between the classrooms, and you just pulled it in a little bit, now it's a whole lot more like a traditional layout. Corridor with classrooms on the sides. So if you have staff that are still, they want to own the classroom, keep the kids in the classroom, and their teaching style is that's the way it is, a layout like this does not force you into change that you're not ready for. But what it does do is it gives you the opportunity to start doing some really creative things with what you're doing during your school day. And so you have the flexibility to do both. Again, this is something where I think somebody like Jim Holbeck, who's been down this road before, can come alongside and hear where your teachers and staff are at. And then also I would suggest, not even coming from another administrator, we'd love to get you connected with your staff, with the teaching staff that have been in some of these different models. and let them hear it from their colleagues that are actually doing it, and not necessarily from principals and superintendents. And how does it really work? And what happens when, well, I used to send my kids down to the media center and that was my prep time. But if they're here, how do I get it done? It's questions like that your staff are going to ask. And those are the things that we have to work through. And so you never want to make a change without letting them first get excited about what they're changing to. And so you really got to work that. The professional development side of this is just as important as the facility side of it. So, did that answer the question? Okay, thanks.
What were some of your takeaways just from doing the building walkthroughs and initial reactions to our district?
So, okay, good, the mic's still on. You know, the initial reactions are there is something needed at every single one of one of the elementary schools that we walked through. Some more than others, and there's a lot that could be done, but we really need to balance that with your budget and the needs of the district as a whole. So we could go into each one of the buildings. You know, some of them have ADA issues; they need some elevators, but the feasibility of that, when we look at that, doesn't make a lot of sense. So how do we make sure that that's being addressed at other schools? Transportation issues at some of them, some updates needed at others. You know, it's a wide range. And so really what we would like to do is get into each one again and talk to more than just the administrators that we walked through with, and make sure that we're understanding where you are and where you want to go. And I know that's gonna be a little bit more of a political slide-out answer, but really there's a lot that we do need to do. I know Jim was very clear, and when I've talked to him, it's been, you need at least one more elementary school. Maybe some need to be taken down. Maybe one needs to be taken down. Maybe there's just some facility updates that need to happen. And I think that's something that we definitely want to talk to you all about, and make sure we understand where the community is too, because that will impact every community and how we end up doing that. You had a question too.
Oh. Good minds think alike.
I'm gonna defer to Dan on this one.
You want me to tackle that one?
Yeah,
Okay.
go for it.
When it comes to grade configuration and sizes and enrollments, I mean, there's, you can have neighborhood schools, and the interesting thing is that depending on how you actually how you're assigning students to come to those schools, is it truly operating as a neighborhood, or does it just happen to just be a grade center within a neighborhood? You know, that's one of the questions we need to ask ourselves too. And then the next thing is beyond how does those neighborhoods, how do they feel about that? I mean, there's oftentimes there's this nostalgia to, that's the landmark in the community. That's where we go. That's our school, sort of thing. But is there an advantage to? And again, I don't think there is a right answer. There's just choices, and there's costs that go with those choices. Or do you do it by grade center? You go with, kindergarten through, your early primaries are in one school, and then you go to another up to, fourth, fifth, sixth in another, or, an intermediate, and then you go to middle school and you go that way. The advantage of doing that is now if you don't have the dollars to bring every school up to the same level of facility opportunity, at least you're providing parity. And every kid is getting the opportunity at, nobody's getting, these folks get the great school over here, and the folks on the other side of the tracks, they got to put up with this school. Everybody's going through. But you got to weigh that against the fact of how many transitions through a facility are these young kids having to go through? And every time you change their learning environment from one year to the next, every change. It's a shift and it's an adjustment for them. And there is, I would say, a little bit of a catch-up period. They're already doing it from going to elementary to middle school and then to high school. You know, they're dealing with that. How many more of those, I wouldn't say an opportunity, those hurdles that you want to introduce? So that's maybe the downside to grade centers. So it's, you know, balancing where your community at is in terms of how important is that neighborhood school versus how important is it for every student to have an equal opportunity to the facilities that they're exposed to. And then I'll come down to just another side of it that you got to balance in is the economics of it. If you brought everybody into one facility, if you're looking at the numbers, if you go in that neighborhood of about 4 to 5 sections per grade level, K through 8. If you get to about 600 students, 6 to 700 is getting a little bit, but you get them all under one roof. Economically, your food service, your administrative staff, principals, and that all of that, those needs, special ed, and you're consolidating them into one facility like that, it's the most economical to run as a district. So then you got to ask your community that. Here's the numbers if we do it this way, versus having all of these schools in your neighborhoods that are smaller, that are less section schools, and spreading it out, and you're running 3 facilities versus 1, or 2 versus 4. Those are the issues. I guess I can spell out the issues, but it really comes down to the balance of what is really important to you, and then we can help you identify the cost to what your choices are in some of those choices. So.
Other questions?
Can you share with us your firm's experience in working with an early childhood facility, whether that be an addition or a new building or a standalone or combined? Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. Most of the elementary facilities that we've been doing lately, I would say 2/3 of them, maybe even 3/4, in the last 5 years, the elementary facilities have some segment that is early childhood. And we're seeing that trend for a few different reasons. People are, number one, recognizing the benefits of early childhood, preschool. We're also seeing that daycare is getting tighter and tighter at those early ages. And so people are seeing the preschool opportunity as that's an opportunity to take care of some of their family's daycare needs. But the other thing, from a school district standpoint, is, and especially in some districts, or some communities where there is potentially competition, that communities are closer and kids can open and roll out. We're seeing this a lot in Minnesota. It becomes a competition for students coming up into that district. And the sooner you can get kids in that district, they get comfortable with the district, and they go into that. And so, we're seeing a push and a drive for that, because for the value of it, it's being valued more, and also because it's allowing many public schools to start that pipeline, getting a little bit closer to the cradle, when the enrollments can start. So yeah, I would say most of our elementary facilities incorporate an early childhood aspect into it. And there have been some standalone facilities, like, for example, Brainerd School District in Minnesota. We were involved. They passed a ginormous referendum. It was like $200 million. They were touching 13 different facilities. And we came in and we were helping them at a conceptual level as the educational planner for getting the conceptual work done with all of those. And one of the projects was they were actually building a new elementary. They vacated the old elementary, and we helped them lay out and just redesign the entire. It was about a 3-section elementary K through 5 that they converted to their entire ECFE center for the district. And so that was fun to get that whole process going and get that conversion going. So. There's got to be something out there that's just itching that I got to ask this question, right? Any other thoughts or reactions to what we've shared? Or, yeah.
Yeah.
Just have a question about building costs. They've skyrocketed, as we all know. What are you seeing down the road in a couple of years, maybe? Is there any discussion about that? Building costs for build homes or getting up there, and I'm sure they
Yeah.
have facilities as well.
Right. Just in terms of what we're seeing for costs, since the turn of the year, in January, we started to see things creep up, and now what we're seeing, well, and you've probably noticed, you go to the lumberyard, and you're paying what, $7 for a 2x4? It's crazy where some of the lumber prices are going. But the other prices that we're seeing a lot of escalation on are steel. We're seeing a very volatile market in steel right now too. So the prices are jumping around. We don't know where the material prices are going to go. It almost feels like we're doing catch up for what we've had, for last year for sure, and even before that. It's like prices were kind of compressed down, and now it's like they're almost like they're catching up for a couple of years worth. The side benefit to that, though, is that if you're in any sort of bonding situation, interest rates are still at historic lows. And so that kind of takes some of the sting out of it. But, in looking in terms of a year out, we're seeing I would suspect that we're going to see inflation starting to, escalation costs coming into play in the bond market a little bit. And the prices, I think, they'll slow down growing. I don't know if we're going to return to 2020 levels of construction. I mean, if any school district that got a project off in 2020 that was starting, they hit the sweet spot. It was great pricing because contractors were hungry. But I do expect it to cool off. I don't know that it's going to come back down. But
The other thing
that's what we're
seeing
seeing
with pricing too, not just pricing, but it's also long lead times.
Mm-hmm.
So steel bar joists, for instance, where we used to be able to get them in a couple months, now they're 6 to 9 months out. We're seeing on average about 7 months. So really taking that into consideration too. It would be really great if we were fortune tellers, because then we would know what the market was going to do. But we could at least tell you what we see now.
I will add this, though, that when it comes back to the planning stage, it does make us seriously take a look at, really asking the question with you is, how much do we really need to build? And how creative do we have to get, or can we get with your existing facilities and finding creative ways to get some of these opportunities and getting you future-proofed within your existing facilities? And that's usually where we want to start, both from a sustainable aspect and also from an economic aspect. So in that process that I was sharing with you, that's really some of the places we want to start. And then if you absolutely have to, well, then you build new. But start with where the economics make the most sense first.
And Dan, too, even when we go out to bid, putting out different bid packages or alternates, say the roof structure could be steel or it could be precast. Let's get a bid for both, and making sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck, essentially, and in the right time frame, too. So we've done that on a few projects recently. We could tell jokes to get you guys all to wake up.
I'll do another question. So
Yeah.
Your experiences maybe in the last year, have you felt like COVID has slowed down that process of community engagement? I think when we've done this before, we're bringing lots of different people into a room, and maybe not everybody is ready for that right now, and it would be a different feel for sure. And I don't know, none of us know when that's going to go away, but have you felt like it's slowed down that process for building collaboration, getting your stakeholders involved? How do you see that working in Yankton?
Very good question. This community engagement process that we just shared here, in this doodle, we've seen this go virtual. And we've done a few of these. Some districts, they want to do it. We've got to give the venue for people to come and show up. I was at one of these just last night. We had 20 people show up. But if you go Facebook Live and you give them a venue to get their input that way, and even some of the early on listening sessions, where we're meeting with staff or meeting with community members, and we love to do the index cards and get people doing their highest hopes, pin them up on the wall, let everybody look through them, start prioritizing and ranking them, doing dots and all that. It's easy to do when you get everybody in the room and you can work collaboratively like that. But we've actually, in the last year, we've started going digital with that. And I will say Katie's become kind of an expert in that. There's software platforms out there that allow us to do that. Thought Exchange is one. Katie, you've worked with a few others too. But the other advantage to that is now we can leave it open. And if people can't make it that evening and be able to engage in that, they can come in and still, you can leave it open for a few days. People can come in and think about the comments that are being out there and then rank other people's comments. Well, I agree with that one. I'd give that one a 3 versus a 5 or whatever. And now you can let the time work for you that you can do in a digital environment that you can't really do on just meeting face to face. I still love getting together with people face to face. It's, but we also have to recognize that a lot of people are way more comfortable in a social media world than what they were before.
I would add to that, even throughout the design process, in terms of engaging staff and getting their input on their rooms, right? Sometimes it happens over a summer, let's say. It's hard to get staff to come in over a summer and give them their summers up. We understand the value of them. But sometimes we've actually gotten better turnout from staff doing that on a digital format because they can just log in from their house. And calling in for an hour is a lot easier than getting them to come into the school, give them up more time. There's absolutely virtual options there that we got the same results from the in-person. So there's opportunities out there.
Any communication plan that we develop, we would want to actually sit down with you and maybe find out what is right for you and in your community and what resonates with them. I mean, is it radio? Is it just the social media? Or is it that's good old-fashioned, let's get out the easels and the boards and let's get all together in a room? So we want to craft that, and maybe it's a combination of all the above. We'd want to craft that with you to make sure that we're resonating with your community.
And it's important to do a combination or variety of them anyways, because you pick a 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night or something, maybe that doesn't work for everybody, but you pick 10 o'clock on a Thursday and maybe a different population, a different group of people can come. So you want to make sure you're having a variety of those options available to get a diverse population of opinions as well.
And Katie was mentioning doing engagement with the staff and teachers online. That's actually when I can pinpoint the day that I started working from home, because we were hosting one of those virtually. People were there was some rumblings about people staying home, and we said, well, we'll just do this, for the next week we can work from home. Haven't gone back to the office since, but that's how we did the engagement. And actually, like she said, better turnout. We had every single staff come and the next week. And so from that standpoint, it really has worked really well. Go ahead.
I just think of maybe the negative spin of with social media and, not standing behind your comments and wanting this to be, very collaborative, and really, I think there'll be some controversial things that'll come along with it, when you're talking grade level centers versus, neighborhood schools. And I think it will be important for our community to be part of that, and I wouldn't want it to become negative and not just a balloon through maybe more virtual and more social media, where when things come up, they can't be addressed right away and they just kind of fester online.
I'm part of a campaign right now that we're getting input by sending out a lot of surveys. So that was another way we're gathering input. So we're sending out surveys, gathering the input, and then doing some in-person meetings and breaking them up. So we could easily do an in-person meeting day A, and 100 people respond, and we have RSVPs. And so there's lots of ways that we can break it up, and I think exactly to address that issue, because we've all seen how negative comments can just spin out of control.
Well, we've got a question for you, if you feel comfortable throwing out some thoughts. We'd like to know from you, through this, as you look at this process and this undertaking that you're about to go under, just one word or phrase comments. What are some of the things that get you excited about it, that you think, if we could just do this, we know that it'll be successful? Or this is what I really hope to achieve out of this. Are there any thoughts that you'd like to share with us along those lines? Highest hopes?
Yeah. It's awesome.
And I think you have a really great opportunity to do that in South Dakota, for sure, and in this area.
Yep. The hope is to become a leader in early childhood education.
I think you had one as well.
I agree with what Sarah said, just 100%. And I also add that I want to make sure that we're equitable in our elementary schools for kids, regardless of where they're attending, or if we do grade level buildings or neighborhood schools, and we have equitable facilities for our kids.
So whatever we do, that it's fair and equitable.
Absolutely.
And then piggybacking on what Sarah said. Good comments.
I would add in providing the flexible spaces, and you guys touched on that a lot, for promoting collaboration, either by grade level or just within the classroom itself.
Okay. But the comment being is the hope for flexible spaces to basically to give you the latitude, to give your district the latitude to explore how you learn. Okay. Hope I'm not putting words in your mouth. Did I say that right? Okay.
I think I just used the word innovative.
Innovative. That was the word. Good. Any others?
Community buy-in. We've heard that from multiples of you, making sure you have the support of the community. Okay.
All
Well,
right.
thank you all very
Yes.
much. Thanks for staying this evening too.
Yeah.
It's
We
late.
appreciate you keep staying here till the bitter end.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
And next time I'll pull out my jokes because they're really good.
She's got good ones.
She does. She's got some good ones. She keeps us entertained as Dan said, at our K-12 meetings on Friday mornings.
Yeah. And also, I don't know if there's any Star Wars fans out there, but may the 4th be with you. Let's put them here.